The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Now, I'm gutted Mike's gone. Anyway, I don't know why he's saying that was the good news. Anyway, bad news is it's me for the next 3 hours, guys. It's 3 minutes past 10. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense and the home of pretty much got my voice back, which is all very, very exciting. Well, for me, anyway. Less so for my husband, let's be honest. I mean, I'm just being honest. But anyway, lots and lots to talk about, whether you are listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. As I say, as always, it is so lovely to have your company on this quite miserable, grey Monday morning. It's not feeling very spring-like today, but we hope to put a spring in your step with all of the chat today. With you live all the way until 1 o'clock and lots to talk about. And yes, we are going to continue the conversation about benefits, because it is just extraordinary what is going on. And the fact that this was just totally happening under our watch and under the Tories, now under Labour, and everyone just kind of ignored it. The people who must have known and should have known, we pay them to know there's a problem here, not actually tackling the issue until people like Fraser Nelson at The Spectator and others actually put this on the front pages. But now we've got the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, saying the NHS is over-diagnosing mental health conditions and people are being written off. Tell us something we don't know. Good to hear he's actually trying to tackle it, but still, is it too little too late? Failure by the Tories as well as by Labour. He said the government is preparing to cut disability benefits. We're expecting an announcement tomorrow from Liz Candle, the Work and Pension Secretary, of disability cuts for up to 1 million people, making it harder for people to actually claim benefits, which they, let's face it, don't need. This comes with the astonishing revelation today that 1 in 4 young people say they've considered quitting work to live on benefits. I mean, if we just take that option off the table, as in you just aren't allowed to claim benefits under a certain age, I think we could kind of solve that overnight, could we not? Also, we're going to talk about the number of failed asylum seekers waiting to appeal their rejected claims. That has soared by nearly 500% in 2 years. The number of asylum seekers waiting for an appeal has risen to nearly 42,000. That's by the end of last year. Also, on the issue of Ukraine, Donald Trump said he's going to be speaking to Vladimir Putin about ending the war in Ukraine. That's tomorrow. He's already talked about basically, dividing up the territory. So a bit of a worry there for Zelensky and others. Plus, Keir Starmer said he is willing to station thousands of British troops in Ukraine for years, if that is what's needed to maintain a ceasefire and deter another Russian invasion. Well, going to talk about all of that throughout the show. Also, you might have seen the Mail on Sunday splash at the weekend about a secret dossier that was handed to Boris Johnson way back in early 2020, which basically said, look, the cause of COVID is from basically a lab accident in Wuhan. It was man-made by accident, not something that happened at a wet market in China. That basically was completely poo-pooed at the time by one Patrick Vallance, now Lord Vallance, now a science minister. He, of course, was very much in cahoots with Anthony Fauci in the States and many other leading scientific figures in trying to shut down any debate publicly about the cause of COVID, which, by the way, does matter, given that it basically killed hundreds of millions of people and by the way, actually cost trillions to the economy. It changed our lives and our civil liberties forever. You'd think people might want to know the actual reason why it happened. Maybe so we could stop it happening again, do you not think? Well, we're going to talk to the brilliant Matt Ridley, who's written about this a little bit later in the show about that. All that coming up. Plenty more besides. Delighted to say, joining me today is commentator Sam Armstrong, as always on a Monday morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Where do we even start with these benefits reforms? I mean, just some, key facts. 1 in 4 young people apparently considering quitting the workforce. 1 in 5 new cars on sale now are from the Motability scheme for people who are claiming personal independence payments and the like. We are looking at the numbers involved are so extraordinary. 1.2 million young people under 25 are now claiming sickness benefits. 2 in every classroom of children at school are on some kind of sickness or disability benefit. The cost of personal independence payments, one of the main forms of disability benefit, has risen from 13.7 billion a year before the pandemic. It's now 22 billion. It's expected by the end of the decade to be 34 billion quid. And 1.3 million people of working age claiming disability benefits for conditions such as depression and anxiety. That's almost half of all disability claimants, and it's nearly twice as many as a decade ago. Have we just suddenly got an awful lot sicker in this country, but crucially just in mental health rather than any other format? Or is there another explanation, Sam?
Well, I'll give you an explanation. It's that if you claim that you are sick, if you claim that there is something wrong in your head that nobody can observe physically, but you say on the symptoms you've got that you feel that you can't work, you get a cheque each and every month from the government that exceeds that people go to work in. You can go and get a brand new car, and not just any car, a 55 grand.
You have to put a deposit down. You have to have the money for the deposit.
But then all of the payments every month are sorted, and we now are in a situation.
Literally replacing the tyre, insurance, MOT, everything.
Absolutely cash free. Look, I think, arguably, you're a mug for going to work. You're a mug for schlepping in your second-hand car to go put a shift in, to work hard, to provide for your family, to do the right thing so that you can take home the bacon at the end of the day and put the food on the table. Yeah. Because so many people now have just rigged the system, they've hacked the system, they've worked out that they can just take the mickey.
They're not stupid. I mean, that's the thing. There's always this idea, and I find this, this sort of that sort of middle class, sort of great and the good, the sort of, there's us. And then there's the poor people, and that everyone operates using different rationale and different motivations. No, it's exactly the same, which is, how am I going to be better off? And if you can be better off claiming benefits, then why would you not claim benefits? It's a completely rational decision, especially if your only option for a job is realistically a minimum wage job, doing not interesting work, probably in not pleasant conditions, with a pain in the backside boss, shouting at you or whatever. But the thing I think people often understand is like, well, no one would just try and live on PIP, personal independence payments, because, that's about around the £9,000 mark a year. Like, how could someone possibly afford that? And of course, they just don't understand the benefit system, because, of course, you get a top up. It's called a premium if you get PIP. So there are loads of other benefits you're entitled to. So if you're on PIP, and by the way, I had some people messaging me over the weekend saying, most people, PIP isn't related to whether you work or not. I mean, you could be in work and still get it. So you're working, but you've got a disability that involves, you do need a car because you're disabled, physically disabled, can't walk. So, actually getting to work, and back, that's an understandable thing. And it's an extra cost that you might have, which other people don't have there. But for the grace of our God, we're not disabled. So, happy to help. But we're actually talking about people getting this if they work or if they don't work. But only 1 in 6 people who claim PIP work. Most people don't. And a lot of those don't work full time. They're doing 1 or 2 days a week. Okay, better than nothing, but nevertheless. But on top of your PIP, you can also get housing benefit. Again, that it could be the tune of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds a week. Job seekers allowance on top of it as well. Income support, working tax credit if you're on low income, employment and support allowance, but only if you get the PIP daily living component, pension credit as well if you're older. You can get council tax discount. You can also claim that for a child who's still in education. You might therefore get more money for your housing benefit. You can get money off your council tax bill. You can get travel support like vehicle tax discount. So even if you don't get the mobility allowance, you only pay half the vehicle tax. You can qualify for free local bus travel. It's just. The list is endless.
Yeah. Free dentistry, free prescriptions.
Free. You basically get onto the gravy train of pretty much everything that goes. You even get a free carer or companion ticket every time you visit the cinema. I mean, an essential companion card for free entry to up to 2 carers at the National Trust for English Heritage Sites. I don't know how many of them are using those, but there are just so many benefits you can get. And when you tot them all up, it tots up to a lot of money.
Yeah, and people can see and recognise this, by the way, because, everybody knows somebody, whether it's on their street, in their local area, that is taking the Michael.
Thank you.
People know it. People can see it. And is it any wonder that they are getting more and more frustrated when they can see, they can watch, they can feel what's going on? And it relates to the other great problem in our society. And there are 2 big problems that explain so much what is going wrong with this country. One is we have 1 million more people saying they're sick. Yep. The other is we have 1 million more people coming into the country every year. And we also learned today that there are more than 1 million foreigners claiming benefits, not just disability benefits, all the benefits.
People legally allowed to be here, given right to remain, and the like. But hold on, why are you here if you're not earning?
You shouldn't be in this country at all, full stop, unless you are making a positive financial contribution to the wealthiness or the livelihood of this country. And yet, time and time again, we see people schlepping over here, and this doesn't even account for the fact their families are coming with them, and they are going straight on to benefits, and we're told these are the brightest and the best. I'm sorry, but if your salary needs to be topped up by the welfare system, you are not the brightest and the best. All of this has been happening. All of this has been going on.
By the way, under your lot. Got worse under your lot.
Under the Tories, under Tony Blair. It's going to carry on under this lot. Every single politician that has been on this show for the last 30 years has known it's been going on. They've had the opportunity to do something about it, whichever party they're in. They've all been in power at one stage. They've chosen not to do it. They have said who they stand with, and the people that they stand with are those that are abusing the system and not those that are funding it.
And that's the crucial thing, isn't it? Because, again, we're going to have calls today, and I want you to get in touch on this, but we're going to have calls today, and as always, there'll be people saying, I really need my benefits. Yeah, we're not after you. We're not saying if you genuinely need benefits, I've always said this thing, just have a village hall. Let's just have the village hall, and we get everyone sitting there. We go, someone come explain why you need these benefits. And by the way, your neighbour can speak up and say, well, that's funny because I saw you going off to the, on the roller coaster the other week. You seemed quite happy when you were going off to the, to Thorpe Park. You didn't seem to have a problem with your disability then. I just think the average person could actually read this and know when people are swinging there. I think we need to start rewarding people for shopping people. I really do, because it is stealing. It's stealing from taxpayers, but it's also crucially it's stealing from other disabled people whose benefits we could improve. I don't want anyone who is seriously disabled or the serious mental health illness. And of course there are people with serious mental health illnesses who need to have our help. I want to be able to help those people to live a decent life, to know if through no fault of their own they've been dealt a bad hand in life. You know, I've been lucky, other than the cough, apologies for that, you know, I've been dealt a really good hand in life, and I think part of the duty, if you've got a good hand in life, is to be a net contributor to pay for people who haven't been as lucky as you. I think it's a moral thing. It's not even just financial. I mean, we can't afford to have all these people not working, especially with the demographics, with an ageing society. But I think it's a moral crusade. And when you get these backbench Labour MPs, you know, the Diane Abbotts and the like, you go on telling the radio going, oh, this is awful, don't attack disabled people. Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, who I've normally got a lot of time for, he comes straight out like, you know, we can't be taking benefits away from people. Now, I think the government's plan for a freeze on PIP payments in terms of the amount, when inflation is quite high, I don't think that really makes much sense. What you need to do is limit who can get it. Reassess everybody if necessary. Literally, reassess everybody right now. And unless there's something really obvious why they cannot work. And let's just get these people off. But the thing I'm most worried about is 1 in 4 young people considering quitting the workforce. Those are the ones who are actually in the workforce, by the way. You know, got more than 1 million young people who are not in work, not in training, not doing anything. Well, what are they living on? They shouldn't be entitled to a single penny. You're young and able-bodied. Oh, well, I've got anxiety and depression. Well, so is everybody on it's a miserable Monday morning. Who isn't feeling a bit depressed and miserable on a miserable Monday morning and it's cold and, you know, people haven't got, you know, much money in their pockets? Get over yourself, get to work. I've just got no time for it.
Within living memory, our expectation of young people has gone from landing on the beaches of Normandy, running into machine gun fire and standing with your friends in the grimmest and most desperate situation that any of us can possibly comprehend, to please, 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 would you go to work if we ask nicely? But if you don't, we will pay your lifestyle anyway while you sit there on an Xbox. No, that is wrong. That is wrong, not just because it's unfair on everybody else that has to provide them. It's also wrong for those young people, right? Because if you think you're depressed and anxious now, well, you wait till you're 30 years old and you've spent the best years of your life cooped up in your childhood bedroom playing stupid Xbox games, flicking around social media. I can tell you, if you are sick now, and I'm sceptical, you definitely will be at the end of that.
Work is good for you.
And politicians that damn you know, young people, children, working people to this are not standing with those people. They are hurting them, they are damaging them, and they are ruining their lives, and their entire futures will be more miserable because of the so-called generosity of the public sector
also,
right now.
I mean, sorry, let's talk about parents as well. Because again, we've got that whole thing, you know, it's now routine for kids. I mean, a huge number of children now are routinely off school. And we're going to be talking to the former Ofsted Chief Inspector Amanda Spielman, who's attacking the government for their school reforms, but I might ask her about this as well, you know, because she tackled this massive issue post-lockdown. Again, we normalise kids not going to school, but the parents who don't just say, well, you've got a sniffle, get to school. I mean, get to school. You know, you caught the sniffle at school, you'll cope. You might not feel great, but that's life. Get on with it. And I just do think we are. I mean, they have all these classes about mindfulness and all this thing, mental health. They talk constantly about mental health, and there's some really interesting studies that show that actually the more you talk about that stuff, actually the iller kids get, because they start finding problems and identifying. And instead of talking about, like, you know, what can you do today? What can you do for other people? What can you achieve? It's all about how can you cope? How can you cope? Well, no wonder these kids are all miserable. Oh yeah, here's another thing. Put your phones down at dinner time, parents. Talk to your sodding kids occasionally. Find out what they're thinking and how they're feeling. I mean, you know, find out about their friendships. You know, there's so many parents who just don't speak to their kids. They've got no idea what's going on in their lives. And then, oh, he's got ADHD. Oh, has he? Or have you just not parented your child for the last 10 years? I'm sorry, I'm zero tolerance on this. I really think we need an absolute wake-up call. And I've got no time for the Andy Burnhams and people like that going, oh, but what about, you know, we need to make sure there's enough money for the people who need it, who need our help, who are elderly, disabled, people in crisis, those people, and everyone else. Get back to work today, end of. And we should be pointing our finger and shaming people in the street who aren't working. We really need to go back to naming and shaming. I really believe that. I'd love to hear from you. As the government plans to overhaul the welfare system to cut costs, what would you do to reform disability benefits? What would you do? What would you support? What would work? Do you know people? You've got family members, neighbours, friends who you know are swinging the lead? Tell us their stories. Tell us your story. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can also message us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. I do just want to also just bring in, again, small matter of World War III. Donald Trump is going to be talking with Vladimir Putin tomorrow about Ukraine's ceasefire deal. He says there's already been conversations about territory and basically handing over Ukraine to its aggressors. Keir Starmer has said he's ready to put British troops in Ukraine for years, if that's what's necessary. We've got more meetings this week, proper operational planning now for that peacekeeping force, if and when. How concerned are you about these talks, or do you think that that we are actually going to see, a decent a deal that's doable?
Well, right now the pressure that Trump is exerting has definitely shifted onto Vladimir Putin, and we are beginning to see some of that kind of classic Trump diplomacy, which is he throws all his toys at one side, gets them to say, OK, fine, this is in that case Ukraine. We're going to have to negotiate. And now he's having to go to Vladimir Putin. But Putin is holding out so far. Putin is saying, no, I want more. I'm not prepared to accept any suggestion that Ukraine will be anything other than a full-blown Russian protectorate, because this has always been Vladimir Putin's major objective for what he wants to achieve.
It's not like he's hiding it. He said it blatantly.
You should always listen to... It's a bizarre thought. Yeah. Listen to what foreign dictators say about what they want, and actually you can often understand more than the Foreign Office telling you that, oh no, it's
when
not
they say they're going to do something and then they do it. Maybe the other stuff they said is also what they're planning to do, indeed.
And the question is, has Donald Trump got a big enough stick to get Vladimir Putin to sign up to the kind of deal that I think everybody has now at least begun to accept or resign themselves to, which is current sort of situation, Western peacekeepers doesn't join NATO. Is he prepared to accept that, or is he going to try and hold out for much, 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 much more?
Yeah, indeed. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see what comes of it. And he reckons he can do a peace deal within the next 2 weeks. But again, we are talking about only a ceasefire and nothing more. 10:22 is the time. Your thoughts on Ukraine, always welcome. And anything we're talking about in particular, how would you reform disability benefits? Lots of calls already on the board. We'll get to a couple of those up next. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk.
My very firm belief is there are other forces at work. There are people dripping poison into other people's ears. There's sort of meetings in corridors of Parliament saying, you should do this, you should do that. Did you know this? There are people doing the same within reform.
Yeah.
And I just would casually say the provenance of those people is not from reform. It's from a party that probably doesn't want reform to do well.
Of course.
Now, the problem is everyone's fallen for it, right? Rupert's fallen for it. Nigel seems to have fallen for it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. For me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:25 is the time. Let's get straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000. How would you reform disability benefits? Very much in the news today. Let's go to Dean. He's in Bridgend. Hello, Dean.
Hello, Julia. How are you?
Very well. What do you want to say, my darling?
Well, Julia, right, I'm sick to death, right, of constantly shelling out money for other people. So recently, I've just sold my house, and basically what I'm doing with the money, which comes in next week, is I'm going to stick it in crypto, right? I was in the army. Yeah, I was in the army for 20 years. I've got maintenance and PTSD, but I've never claimed a penny for it. So what I'm going to do, then, is I'm going to say I've got my mental health problems, and I live on my sister's sofa with all my money in the bank, and as soon as I get a flat then, I'm going to draw it into someone's account, I'm going to live life on a hog. If you can't beat them, Julia, join them.
That's the terrible thing. I think there are lots of people who now, again, especially if you live in a neighbourhood, but you know, like, you know, 2 doors down and to the right and 1 door down to the left, they're doing that. And you're thinking, why the hell am I getting up at 6:30 going to work?
Well, Julia, I drive cranes for a living, right? And I'm on the 40% tax bracket, right? And I'm shelling out money, and we're getting nothing for it. Council tax is rising. My street is private. We pay £1,000 a year just to have the grass cut.
Yeah, exactly. And occasionally they might empty your bins if you're lucky. What would you do? Let's talk more positively. What would you do to reform disability benefits?
Right. What you do with the reform disability benefits is you cut the benefits, right? Like stop the show rate, bam. If someone really has a problem, then they come to you, and then you can delve deep into them and say, okay, do you need the money? What do you need? Check their bank accounts, check what money's coming in, what money's going out, blah, 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 blah. And that's what you should do for everybody. And the car thing, right? You should be assessed if you can drive a car by a driving instructor, which is done by by DVLA. And then you should have an assessor in the back as well, a disability assessor, to see how you get out that car, how you get in the car, and how you operate the car. And if you're pointed to that, that's when you should get a car.
Well, although again, I think sometimes it's the carer effectively has the car for you. It's in your name, but it's for the carer to use. But again, I don't understand why I don't understand why any mental health disability requires you to have a car paid for by the state.
Well, Julia, right, I got diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder after getting injured in the army, right, in Afghanistan. But I've claimed absolutely zero, nothing. I could have had PIPs a lot. I didn't bother. But now thinking 4 years later now, I'm thinking, is it worth it? Should I just get on the hog like the rest of them?
Get on the gravy train. I know, and I do think that is a really big issue, because I think it just becomes normalised. We've got these websites that basically tell people this is what you have to say, these are the phrases you use, and it will guarantee you. Because again, one of the main things is an awful lot of these people are now being assessed over the phone, for goodness sake. They're not even meeting with anybody, which, makes it much easier for someone to say anything they want to say. Dean, thank you for that. I understand your frustration, mate. I really do. Ben is on the line. He's in Lincolnshire. Hi, Ben.
Oh, hi, Julia. How are you doing?
Very well. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Cheers. So, benefits. About 15, 18 years ago or so, my wife got really ill. She couldn't look after the children, so I had to stop work and look after the children, look after her for quite a while. We applied for, back then it was disability living allowance, and my wife failed the medical. It was the most humiliating medical.
Why?
she kept answering all these questions, and the doctors weren't happy. And then the doctor said to her, I need you to bend over and touch your toes. And my wife said, I can't do it. I physically can't do it. And the doctor was like, well, you have to. And she's like, if I do it, I'm going to fall over. And the doctor's like, oh, no, you have to do this. So my wife did it. She had a massive dizzy spell. I just managed to stop her from hitting the floor. She was then turned around and said, right, the medical's over, we can't continue.
Because you couldn't touch your toes?
Because you couldn't touch your toes. She got 0 points.
Oh, because she couldn't? I would have thought if she could touch her toes, they'd go, oh, you're physically able to do it.
No, she got 0 points. She failed the medical.
But isn't that part of the point? Presumably it wasn't with a doctor, was it? That was the thing. I've got a massive issue with the not people who aren't medically trained doing this.
It was somebody wearing a uniform, an African lady who very, very strong accent. I don't know how long she'd been in the country. I don't think that really makes too much of a difference. But it was a medical professional that we
some
saw.
Sort, yeah, okay.
Of some variety.
But you felt it wasn't an accurate assessment. Okay, so and how did she feel about claim? Did she get any benefits in the end?
We got the benefits, and we're children, so we got the child tax credits, we got benefits, the rent was paid, the council tax was paid. We had...
And that's thousands.
We had just over £3,000 a month to live off of.
Wow.
I'm only just earning over that nowadays, and this was 18 years ago.
Yeah.
I couldn't have... I was about £1,000 a month better off than what I was when I was at work.
Wow.
And do you know what? I couldn't wait for her to get back on her feet and so I could go back to work.
Yeah, and she did, and you got back.
The children were... We lived really, really healthy, and we did really well, but the lifestyle, I just didn't like it. I didn't want to be there.
Yeah, you wanted to go out and work and have a life and a... But this is the thing, can you see, though, why people could get trapped on that, not just financially, but,
Absolutely. If you've got no sort of self-pride in yourself and you just... Yeah. But people know how to play the system. My mate's wife, she's really ill, and a cousin of hers said, oh, I'll fill out the PIP's paperwork for you because I know how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's your issue.
This was during COVID, so she didn't have to telephone call, and she does deserve it. There's no ifs or buts about it. She definitely deserves the payments, but her cousin did all the paperwork for her because he knows what the questions are.
And how many other people has he done it for as well? We have got people literally advising people, making money doing that. Ben, really interesting call. Thank you very much indeed. 10:32 is the time. Right now, before we go to a quick break, it's time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer.
How'd you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Right, well, very good luck to you. Don't want to miss out on the gig of the decade and all that dosh as well. Mind you, I think you can't buy those tickets for 10 grand, can you? 10:33 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. Up next, I'm going to talk to former Justice Secretary for Labour peer Lord Charlie Faulkner about what the benefit reforms might be and what they might not be. That's coming up. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:35 is the time. Let's talk to Lord Faulkner now. Charlie Faulkner is a Labour peer and a former Justice Secretary. Very good morning to you, Charlie.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Next question, do you agree with Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, when he says that basically there are far too many people who are getting benefits where we're over-diagnosing mental health problems in the NHS? Or do you agree with Andy Burnham, who says that the changes to welfare payments that we're told we're going to hear tomorrow will trap too many people in poverty?
Well, I don't know what these proposals are going to contain. I was rather disturbed, Julia, when you introduced me before the advert, saying I'm going to tell you what these proposals are. And unfortunately, I don't know what they are. I was really struck by your conversation immediately before the break with Ben from Lincolnshire, who said at one stage, this is, I think, not recent, he was getting £3,000 a month. And he said that was £1,000 more from various sorts of benefit than he would get if he worked. He didn't want it, quite rightly. He wanted to work because it gave dignity. But if you have a benefit system that encourages people to remain dependent on the state when they could work, that's a bad system. But equally, you've got to ensure, and you've had lots of people ringing as well, Julia, with whom you've been incredibly sympathetic, who really genuinely cannot work, and they are incredibly upset and worried about what's going to happen. So the devil will be in the detail. You've got to try to aim to have a system that does not incentivize dependency when you can work, but makes sure that the people who genuinely cannot work, whether it be because of mental illness or physical illness, do not have their benefits cut.
No, there is that. Again, I didn't really understand the point of freezing the personal dependence payments. We understand that's something that has been touted as an idea. Labour backbenchers and some cabinet ministers have complained about that, and that may well be dropped in the plans, because that seems to me, if you think that's the amount of money people need and it goes up by inflation, why shouldn't it go up by inflation? The issue is the number of people who are claiming it, and the fact that so many more people now are claiming for disability from mental health problems. Now, 2 children in every classroom of 30 are now claiming for some sort of disability. We have a huge number of young people who are now on disability benefits, now far more likely to be claiming those disability benefits in your 20s or 30s than you would be in your 50s. Now that tells us there is something going on. It's been a massive explosion since lockdown, perhaps normalising sitting at home all day. Again, I was one of the people warning from very early on that the lockdown was going to be a disaster on that front. It's nice to see other media organisations and Labour and Tories catching up on that now. But what do we actually do about it now? Because it's going to have to be a little bit cruel to be kind, isn't it? Because at the very least, should we not reassess every single person who is on PIP and, for instance, require a in-person attendance from both, not just the person who is claiming, but also the person assessing them? Because most of the assessments in the last 5 years have been done over the sodding telephone.
Well, I would imagine that there is quite a large number of people where there is no real issue, but that they are entitled to the maximum PIP payment. I don't think it would be sensible for there to be a complete reassessment of absolutely everybody. One could imagine the agony and the anxiety that would cause. The 2 things that I think need to be done is, first of all, there needs to be confidence that PIP assessments are effective, and secondly and separately, and this is a different point, that the system incentivizes work over dependency if you can work. And that's the question. I mean, the previous government, the Conservative government, made a number of proposals that were never followed through before the election. We are obviously having to deal with this at a time when there is financial problems in the public finances. Yeah. So we are trying to deal with this problem at a time when there is an issue about defence, and I appreciate that the immediate increases come from aid, but it's plain there's going to have to be yet further increases. Where are they going to come from? You've got this whole benefit structure that does not encourage people to go into work, which is necessary. You need to get people into work if they can work in order to make the economy grow again. And the previous government was backloading public expenditure cuts to later and later. So they were not making the necessary efficiency changes and just pretending everything will be all right in the future.
They were.
And we've got to deal with all that at the same time.
They were from 2010 onwards when Ian Duncan Smith pushed massively. And again, a lot of the changes he made, which Labour criticised, they didn't backtrack on any of them because actually they were sensible. And he got a lot more families back into work, and that's good for the children as well. And then it all went absolutely out the window when it came to 2020, when people were just being written off and signed off on a mass scale. But do you agree with West Streeting that we are over-diagnosing mental health problems, mentally, sort of turning something into a label, ADHD, autism even, depression, anxiety, when often we're talking about people with people in the normal range of behaviour, normal range of normal human emotion, and we're medicalising it and putting people on benefits? That can't be good for people, and it's completely out of kilter with any other Western society.
If there are over-diagnoses going on in the sense that somebody who, for example, is diagnosed as not able to work at all could in fact work, then the system should incentivise that. And the way the system incentivises that is by effective assessment, but also giving training or retraining as necessary to make somebody feel much more confident about the workforce.
I don't understand it. It's the incentive is we're not going to give you any money. We're just not going to give you any money. You're not entitled to anything. You need to go out and get a job.
The question then, Julia, becomes is, are you, for example, reducing people's benefits, support from the state, when in fact they cannot work at all?
No. If someone can work, the incentive is when you're hungry enough, you will go and get a job and turn up every day on time because you have literally not got anything to eat otherwise. I think we need to go very kind of Victorian on this. I mean, I think we need to go Victorian on a lot of parents as well about doing their job in terms of turning out, useful members of society, not victims. That would be a good start. But fundamentally, this idea of we're constantly talking, Labour, the Tories have been just as bad. This carrot, like, oh, we'll try and help you to work, give you the confidence to work. A lot of the young people I've met who don't work, it's not a lack of self-esteem, it's overweening self-esteem. They seem to think they're only good enough to be a Premier League footballer or a pop star, and working, on the counter in the cheese counter in the Tesco's is beneath them. Well, go over yourself.
I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees with the proposition. If you can work and you don't think you get a job worthy of your talents, nevertheless, you've got to work. There's no doubt
Our
about
entire
that.
benefits system says that that's not what the system is. People are allowed to turn down jobs and still get benefits.
Well, it seems to me that in relation to those who can work, there will come a point when those who can work and who can get a job, even though it's one they don't think is worthy of them, they've got to work. And I don't think anybody disputes that proposition.
Yeah, they do. Loads of Labour MPs dispute that.
Well, I think you'll find that not many do. I think you'll find that the issues that are arising at the moment are all about, and you're just sort of slightly gliding your way around this problem, which is, what do you do if people genuinely cannot work? I don't think your Victorian, to use your language, solution is the answer, is it? To say, well, you've all got to work because you'll starve if you don't. There are genuinely people who cannot work.
No, but again, there are the people who genuinely cannot work. We will give benefits to and trying to encourage them. That said, given how many, obviously, if someone is going through some major mental health trauma, we can understand. But we've got people who've come out of wars and been blown up and watched their friends blown up, who manage somehow to keep on coping with life. We need to get a bit more resilience going in our younger people. But also, even with physical disability, there are so many jobs now where people can work from home. I would have expected that fewer people would be off work due to disability.
Well, all of these things that you're saying might be right, might be wrong, I don't know. I think everything depends upon the ability of the system to identify those who do need help and those who don't.
And do you trust the system can do that? I mean, I don't think you can do it on the phone, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, do I trust the system, the nature of the system, which we've seen it over a whole range of judgments that it's making, whether it be asylum, whether it be immigration, whether it be benefit, whether it be disability. The level of successful appeals is so high that one is not necessarily confident that those systems are working well in terms of making judgments at the moment.
The key thing is right now, and again, this is something I think we should deal with just because of the demographics of the country, and I think just basic and the economics of the country and basic morality in terms of not expecting people to pay high taxes to fund people who can work to sit at home, and the morality for the people who are put on the scrap heap of life because work is good for you where you can work. The reality of where we are financially in terms of the spending the spring statement that's coming up from the Chancellor in a week's time suggests that she doesn't have that much room for manoeuvre. She has got to cut that benefits bill, hasn't she?
Well, you're right when you say that the newspapers are trailing the idea that the headroom has gone. I don't know whether that's right or whether that's wrong, but the sense you get is that room for manoeuvre is being reduced by factors external to what Rachel has done, but also because so many problems were not dealt with by the previous government. The things I've mentioned earlier on in this interview. There's always, in politics, isn't there, this thing where big problems never get dealt with until there's a crisis. Yeah. And then when the crisis comes, they're eventually dealt with. And one of the problems, and I think it is a problem, is that the system, the benefit system, does insufficiently prioritises work. Yeah. But if you end up in a situation where you are plainly punishing the wrong people for that, then nobody will have confidence in it.
No, indeed. And there will be mistakes made when you tighten it up. You're going to be more mistakes made in the opposite direction. But let's have an appeals process that can rectify that. I don't believe this should be beyond the wit of man, certainly. Charlie Faulkner, so good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sam Armstrong, as commentator, still with us in the studio. This is the thing. I mean, hey, I still remember when Boris Johnson had his ready-made plan for social care reform. I mean, the reality is that no one really wants to deal with this problem because you're going to have front page of the BBC website and ITV and everyone going, oh, here we are. Here's someone who's severely disabled with their severely disabled child who've lost their benefits. So these reforms are awful. There are going to be mistakes made. We need to have a system to rectify this. But currently the mistakes being made in the wrong direction far too often.
Yeah, and I just have no faith in I've got much less faith than Charlie in the capacity of the British state right now to actually get on with doing this. Yeah. I know a couple of people that work in job centres and every single one of them will tell you what a farce it is, that they are screaming all day at, can we not just interrogate these? Can we not exercise some common sense? And time again, they're told, no, not your job, stay in your lane. And is it any wonder that so many of them end up working at home? They work fewer hours than you or I would consider normal. And as a result, people just keep slipping through. And you raised a really, actually, interesting point earlier, which is that...
Surprisingly.
Wouldn't it be a bit better? Wouldn't we do a better job if people in your street, people in your neighbourhood, it was them responsible for making those decisions? And we have this strange system. Actually, the benefit system can be quite cruel if you've got genuine problems because it's this kind of heartless bureaucracy. But it's also useless at catching bad cases. Yeah. And I will vote tomorrow for any party that can just come up with a system that actually returns it to what it began as, which is a system in traditional terms in parishes where local people were responsible for meeting the needs of others because they were incredibly good at catching out the wrong uns, and most people who are more than prepared to take the mickey with a faceless bureaucrat that doesn't really care in a job centre plus in the local city aren't prepared to do it when it's their neighbours down the street.
Very, very interesting. Love to hear your response to all that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Up next, we're going to be talking about Ukraine ceasefire deal. Is it going to happen? This is Talk.
disastrous schools bill, which is trashing, vandalising 30 or 40 years of what were cross-party education reforms. I think England schools have gone up the international league tables. Meanwhile, schools in Labour-run Wales and in Scotland, where they've done the opposite, they've gone down the league table. They're being smashed up at the behest of the trade unions by Bridget Phillipson. And they are not listening to any of these teachers, all these people with decades of experience. More and more people, even in the papers this morning, saying it's time to stop the schools bill and to have a rethink. But she just doesn't seem to want to listen to any of it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:52 is the time. Let's turn our attention to Ukraine. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are due to speak by telephone tomorrow. That's been confirmed by both the White House and our good friends in the Kremlin. This comes after one of the representatives of Donald Trump was kept waiting, was it some 8 hours before he was allowed to see the president of Russia last week. So we'll see how well those talks go. Let's talk about this now with Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, OBE. He's a former British Army colonel and joins us now. Good morning to you, Hamish.
Hi, good morning,
Thanks
Julia.
for joining us. I mean, it does seem to me, I'm not quite sure what there is left to talk about between Trump and Putin, because Trump has already said, you know, no NATO membership, have to cede territory, no US sort of, you know, security guarantee, and we may not carry on aiding Ukraine. Is there anything left to negotiate, given that he's given away all the negotiating points he's already got?
Well, on the face, it doesn't seem so, Julia. And I think when you listen to what Putin has been saying in the last few years and the last few weeks, you come to that conclusion as well. And Western intelligence agency, as I understand it, believe that Putin himself believes he can still win. And his two main aims were to subjugate Ukraine completely back into Russia and to decouple the US from Europe. And both of those seem to be moving forward. And his stipulation for peace, as you've said what Trump's saying, but Putin is saying NATO back to 1997 borders. That means the Baltic states, the Nordic states, places like Romania and Bulgaria out of NATO. No NATO troops to police a ceasefire. I can't imagine who else will do that. And I think the final bit to this is why I'm not confident that we'll see a ceasefire, is that Putin wants to avoid the awakening with the Russian mothers. We've just passed 1 million Russian casualties. Yeah. And it was those Russian mothers back in 1984 that made Russia withdraw from Afghanistan after 17,000 casualties. So on the face of it at the moment, it doesn't look very likely.
No, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Because the red lines for Putin, I mean, are the basic requirements which the West would expect to protect Ukraine's whatever is left of its territorial integrity if there was some sort of deal. And I don't think anyone now seems to think that Putin wouldn't keep Crimea, probably large parts of the Donbass, 4 regions there, at which point there would have to be a guarantee for Ukraine. We understand that the talks, Keir Starmer and Macron and others, a number of other countries, coalition of the willing, willing to put some troops in. Putin has made it clear, and his foreign minister as well, that he would regard that as a provocation. I mean, he thought talks about NATO from Ukraine would be a provocation, let alone NATO troops in the country. At which point there is no guarantee, no protection, no safety for Ukraine. They cannot stand down forces on that basis. So is it on that basis that you believe that it's just simply not even an option for there to be a ceasefire?
Well, I think it's very unlikely at the moment, because Putin sees he's very much on the front foot and would lose a lot. And he's also asking for the international community to agree to all the 4 oblasts and Crimea to be recognised as Russia. So I don't think that will happen. I do, however, I mean, one must have hope here because this dreadful war cannot continue. And I think the way that the coalition, the willing, as we've called it, are going ahead is the right way because, as we've discussed before, Putin only respects strength, and he's been exploiting weakness of Europe and others for too long now. So I personally believe that a French-British-led peace enforcement force can be effective. But I do, on this case, agree with Starmer that we still need the US air power on the background to do it. But this is too important just to let it go. And, there's lots of musing by Trump at the moment. Maybe it's the rare earth minerals that will get him to the table. I rather worry about his comments last night about discussions about power plants and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. If Russia is going to take that would seem to be pretty significant. But Ukraine is under pressure at the moment, and Russia is making advances. So unfortunately, unless Trump does provide the backstop of US military might, I think a ceasefire in the near future is unlikely.
Well, apart from the fact that America has said, well, Donald Trump has said, he would cease helping Ukraine. It's all very well, Europe, we talk a good game. We haven't actually got much military might to be able to help Ukraine. A lot of that air power as well. But also, crucially, what about if Donald Trump did actually go ahead with, and again, I would be very surprised but very happy to see it, of serious repercussions for Russia if Russia doesn't come to the table and agree to what may be considered reasonable terms for a ceasefire. Do you have any expectation that he would do that?
Well, I think he probably will, and once sort of his demonstration of significant attacks on the Houthis over the last 3 or 4 days have demonstrated that he's not adverse to using American military power. And of course, the Houthis are being controlled by the Iranians, and Trump knows that they're having a severe impact over the Middle East. So he has demonstrated that he will do that, and sort of quite overwhelming force. And Trump knows that when it comes to making America great again, if things are going to be more expensive by goods not going through the Red Sea because of the Houthis, that's going to affect the American economy. And if this war continues, it is also going to affect the American economy. And as Europe rebuilds militarily, he will be really concerned that some countries have cancelled orders for F-35 jets and other American kit. I think that is probably pretty significant. He wants us to buy American military kit. And if people in Europe start turning his back on him, then he might well decide that actually enforcing a ceasefire in Ukraine is the best to make America great again.
It's the fact that we cannot in any way predict what will happen that I find absolutely extraordinary. That, of course, is the disruption that Donald Trump says he, actually can bring about, the art of the deal. But it also, as we know, can strengthen the arm of dictators like Vladimir Putin. Hey, Mr. Bretton Gordon, I hope you're right, former British Army Colonel. I'm going to get the thoughts of Sam Armstrong on this coming up next. Going to get more of your thoughts on benefits reform. What would you do to reform disability benefits with so many people, particularly young people of working age, claiming disability benefits largely for mental health problems? What would you do to reform it? We can't keep paying people to sit at home. We really can't. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because, as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are not
President, Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. Great to have you join us. Sam Armstrong is also still with me as a commentator. I'm going to get his thoughts on all of the big topics today. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking more about, basically benefits reform. The NHS is over-diagnosing mental health conditions and people are being written off. That's what the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has said. This is the government prepares tomorrow to announce cuts to disability benefits for up to 1 million people. This comes as an astonishing figure today. 1 in 4 young people say they have considered quitting work to live on benefits, because that's an option. Again, take that option off the table and it won't be an option. Civil servants face a crackdown on the use of taxpayer-funded credit cards after being caught spending on luxury away days. Fortnum & Mason goodies and, ironically, a course on value for money. You've got to laugh. And the number of failed asylum seekers waiting to appeal their rejected claims has soared by nearly, wait for it, 500% in 2 years. The number of asylum seekers waiting for an appeal rises now to 42,000 people. 42,000. All that coming up, lots more beside. I do want to hear from you specifically on benefits. In particular, what would you do to reform disability benefits? Now, I've got a lot of calls on the board. A lot of you are saying, look, I've got disability benefits, I need them. I'm not disputing those people who definitely need them. But the fact we've got this massive rise in mental health disability benefits, way out of kilter with any other Western country, massive suddenly since lockdown, I simply don't believe all of these are true. I think every single one of these needs to be reassessed. I think pretty much every disability claim should be reassessed. I don't know why it should be stressful if it is done fairly. I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to do it. And where mistakes are made, a very, very, very quick appeal process. I do not think that is unreasonable when we are talking about people getting, in some cases, tens of thousands of taxpayers' money. So I want to know, what would you do to reform disability benefits? Whether you're claiming yourself, family members claiming, whether you believe that the people you know are claiming are legit or not legit. Love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text on 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1. Standard network rate message. Sam Armstrong, before we get to the benefits, I do want to get you on the Ukraine topic we were talking about just before the news with Hamish to Brett and Gordon. Is part of Trump's ability to negotiate peace in Ukraine, and indeed any other major international issue, part of him being the disruptor, the fact that we genuinely don't know if he would just cut off funding and military aid to Ukraine again, if he would basically massive new sanctions or or further action against Vladimir Putin if he doesn't do what he wants. The fact that we don't really know what he would do. It is possible that Donald Trump himself doesn't know right now what he would do. Is that a strength in the US position, or is it a weakness?
I think in the main it is a strength. The trouble that you've got though in this particular circumstance is Vladimir Putin right now does not believe the stick on his end of it. He doesn't believe that Donald Trump is prepared to massively up support to Ukraine, to give Ukraine what it needs to reverse the current trajectory of the war, which is that Russia right now seems to be making slow but nonetheless steady progress across Ukraine. And he also doesn't believe...
only has 20% of the country.
Sure, but why do a deal when you're winning?
Yeah.
Why do a deal? Why settle?
I don't think if you're a massive superpower like Russia, a much bigger country, much greater resource than Ukraine, and after 3 years you've only got 20% of the country, and about 5% of that was Crimea. They already had that. So I mean, I'm sorry. I think that is not winning a war. That's not losing it, but it's not winning a war.
No, but right now Vladimir Putin thinks the best way for him to get a result is to dig in.
Yeah.
And
but he doesn't care how many Russian troops die.
Vladimir Putin doesn't care about anybody other than Vladimir Putin. Right now, he has seen Donald Trump all too publicly show that he's prepared to use a big stick when it comes to the Ukrainians. And he thinks if he just holds the line, demands more and more and more, Donald Trump will be so desperate to get a deal.
Because he said, I'm going to get a deal, I'm going to end the war.
Because he staked his reputation on it, that he will force Ukraine to accept however a bitter pill it is.
Yeah.
And that's the dangerous thing here. Donald Trump, he kind of needs to act as a little bit, in order to do the crazy man, you've got to seem like you're crazy on both directions.
Yeah.
And that hasn't always been the case
really
in this negotiation.
Well, and again, Europe, you say Europe will step up and help Ukraine. Yeah, well, we can't even defend ourselves, let alone Ukraine. Let's reality check. The one good thing that's come out of all of this is Europe stepping up. But again, nonsense about 2.5% and 3%. I mean, realistically, we need to be talking about 5% of spending going on defence right now. People are crazy to think it's going to be anything less than that. Although I think we should stop talking about how much money. We talk about what do we need to defend ourselves? How many men and women in fatigues do we need? How much ammunition do we need? What aircraft carriers do we? And then we spend whatever we need for them, because this isn't optional. This is about protecting our way of life. And I don't understand people who think, oh, there's always money for wars. Yeah, there is. Funnily, there is. Because you haven't got a choice, but there we are. Let's turn our attention back to benefit reforms. And again, part of the reason why we've got to have benefit reforms, wake up call everybody, we've got no money left. We're going to have less and less money. We've got an ageing population and apparently a sicker population. Again, I think this is an economic argument. This is a security argument. We can't have a load of young people sitting on the dole, sitting on disability benefits with their mental health problems when we've got basic jobs that need to be filled and we need taxes that need to be paid to fund, not just older people, but fund things like defence and other basic public services. 1 in 4 young people considering quitting the workforce entirely to live on benefits. 1 in 5 of new cars now are under the Motability scheme, which is a scheme for basically you put down a deposit, but then you get a free car, and your MOT, your tax, all repair, anything you need done for it under your scheme if you're claiming personal independence payments. We've just got a huge number of people on these payments, far out of kilter with any other Western nation in terms of the number of people who apparently have mental health problems, anxiety, depression, autism, ADHD, you name it. They're getting benefits. It's about £9,000 for PIP, but it opens you up to a world of other benefits, well over, in the tens of thousands in terms of tax credits, housing benefit, every other benefit you can possibly imagine. It's untenable. It's unaffordable. It's got to stop. Sam, how would you stop it?
Well, let's start with saying some basic things. Let's start with some home truths. Wes Streeting says we're writing people off. Well, we are, and there's lots of young people that we're writing off unfairly and unreasonably. But you know what? There's also people that are diddling the system. There are people that are fiddling their benefits each and every day. If you walk down every street in this country right now and you knocked on the doors, you would get an answer as to who around there is fixing their benefits when they are absolutely entitled to work. So let's just not be naive anymore. Let's just get it straight. Right. Secondly, you should not be better off on benefits than you would be working, full stop. Motability cars, you should not be able to get a brand new BMW under any circumstances.
Why do you need a new car? I've never had a new car. I've only ever had second-hand cars.
And I'm sorry, a BMW is a luxury car, right? There are a number of cheaper makes that most people in this country drive.
Yeah.
Why don't they drive the nice shiny BMW with the leather seats? Because they can't afford it. Because their salary, after the taxes that have been taken to pay for your benefits, don't extend to getting that. And look, we need to get these numbers way down. I sometimes think that we talk so much on the news about these big numbers, but we're talking 300 billion for now for the benefits bill.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that is pensions.
A lot of that is pensions. But PIP alone, and as we were saying earlier, if you're claiming PIP, you're getting a multitude of other benefits. But PIP alone is 34 billion quid. Put another way, that is half the money we spend on our entire defence on that one category of benefits alone.
And the vast majority of new claimants now are mental health claimants. But again, I think you're right to make this, but there'll be people who are totally genuine, who absolutely need the help. And again, people say, all the people working. 1 in 6 people on PIP are working, not all full time. Vast majority are not working. So it's, although you're able to work, and again, I do find it extraordinary. People who are on high incomes, you could earn 100 grand a year, still able to claim that personal independence payment. I mean, sorry, I don't think you should be able to. I think we've got to get back to benefits being on the basis of need, not want, and not benefit in that sense. It should be need. But then you make the distinction between the people who shouldn't be getting those benefits, who are being failed by, I would say, often by their parents, failed by school, told there's something wrong with them, GP failing them, I'll sign you off, system failing them, I'll sign you off, and then they just don't work, and work is good for you. If you've got depression or anxiety or any of these issues, actually you are better off in work. It's very, very, very clear. And then there are people who are going, I'm not a mug. I'm going to go and get money for free. I'm just going to pretend stuff, and that's fraud. But we're told, the defrauding of the system is, on a tiny scale. It's not. I think it's on a mass scale. And I, like you, have got a very good friend who works the benefit system who just says it's almost obscene what she sees in terms of people defrauding the system. But also then you get people who are desperately in need, who can't pass the right tests and don't say the right things, who really do need to get our help. So the system is broken in both directions.
Yeah, and by the way, let's just also make another thing clear. It's supposed to be a safety net, right? Not a lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
This is not, for those people to rise them back up to where they would be if it wasn't for the circumstances, right? This is a safety net to make sure that we don't live in a society in which disabled people are starving to death, etc., etc. But it's actually not even just mental health cases. We also have people that are presenting with symptoms like ME, like fibromyalgia, conditions that have no clear medical diagnosis. The majority of people claiming disability benefits in this country, the overall majority, there is no empirical medical study to determine whether they are telling the truth or not.
So someone we've had a member caller last week saying, I've got cystic fibrosis. That's a medical diagnosis. But it used to be, I think the giveaway is, it used to always be that it was back pain, because you can't actually verify that someone's got back pain or not, other than you get a video of them. I've done court cases when I was a news reporter, people claiming they're off on the sick back pain, and then you got a video of them bungee jumping on holiday in Thailand. It's like, really? But again, and then again, the depression and the and anxiety and all these things. You just sort of think, well, but how could we possibly verify that? How could we possibly? And we know that one of the things you say in your telephone assessment, no one sees you in person. In your telephone assessment, if you use the word suicide, have you attempted suicide? You're pretty much automatically going to get it.
Julia, our listeners are being asked to believe that there are 1 million new people in the last 4 years that cannot work due to symptoms that they cannot demonstrate, they cannot prove. They're being asked to believe, just in the same way that the vast majority of people coming across the channel happen to be 16 and 17-year-old children, or also fully qualified brain doctors and heart surgeons. people aren't buying it. We're not stupid. We know that we're the mugs, we're being exploited, and politicians who we send to Westminster on big salaries are not prepared to stand up and say what each and every one of us can see, which is we are getting done in. All the tax that I will pay this year, that will cover 1 or 2 people on benefits, right? I am just paying to subsidise other people to defraud the state. I know they're doing it. Everybody knows they're doing it, and yet nothing is done. It's been going on for 30 years.
This is the thing. It's been going on for years anyway, and it happened under Labour, and then Gordon Brown tried to put everyone on the payroll, didn't he, with tax credits? Something like more than 50% of people in this country rely on the state for most of their income. Like, I'm sorry, that's absurd. I mean, that's just madness. But then it exploded. Well, Ian Duncan Smith, I mean, I've always hold a candle for that man, because he really did. He was so castigated, but under the Cameron regime, where he did actually try and really tackle universal credit. And as a sort of a moral crusade, it's bad. It's bad for the country, but it's bad for the individuals. And it's certainly bad for their children if they don't work. Growing up in a household where everyone's kind of swinging the lead is so bad for children. The work ethic comes from, if you talk about kids not going to school, well, parents who go out to work every morning, my daughter's just used to, for years, I'd leave home before she'd even wake up to get to work. My husband leaves for work at 7:30, every morning, and I leave for work, before she goes to school. She lives in a home where people get up and go to work and have to be somewhere, and you have to be there on time, and you have to look appropriate, and you're just expected to turn up every day, and that is part of a culture. And if you live in a culture where everyone's just on the sofa, not doing anything, playing Xbox, then you're not going to grow up with that. So you're damning another generation of people as well. But it just seems to me that Tories did get to grips with it, and then it went mad during lockdown. Just mad during lockdown. Let's just pay everybody to sit at home, whether they've got a job or not. And the Tories totally failed to get on top of it. I mean, sorry, the pandemic finished in 2021, for goodness sake. Why in 2025 have we still got this problem? Why was everyone not reassessed? Why wasn't everyone who worked in the welfare system required to come back into the office and do their job properly?
Well, regrettably, I completely and utterly agree with you. Successive Conservative ministers were simply asleep at the wheel. They were naive. When people came and presented and said they've got these conditions, look, if somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh, I've got mental health conditions," of course you want to believe them.
Be sympathetic.
But when you're handling taxpayers' money that people have had to work hard, that you've taken away from them, whether they like it or not, and you're wanting to hand it to someone else, you have to be able to check and assess it. And it's also the case that as much as people that suffer from depression and anxiety might not feel like going to work, as much as, frankly,
lots of people don't.
I had a headache this morning because I drank too much last night, and I didn't feel like coming to work. But you know what? If I didn't show up today, I wouldn't have got paid. If I don't get paid, I can't pay the taxes to pay for somebody else's benefits.
But also you're like most people, I think, in our audience, you don't like letting people down. Do you know what I mean? You don't, you love being in a studio with me coughing at you. You know that's your great joy in life, is trying to catch my latest bug. No, but that's the thing, isn't it? We just need reality check. I'm quite amused. It's terrible. I'm quite amused that Labour are the ones left holding the hot potato on this case, because every single thing that the Tories did to try and cut the welfare bill, when they were trying to cut it, absolutely screamed about by all these Labour politicians who are now sitting on the front bench, who are now saying exactly the same thing. So I do hope they do go ahead with this. Can I also just finally talk to you about asylum seekers' appeals? They are up by an amazing 42,000 by the end of last year. This partly is because the number of appeals. There are a number of appeals have gone up because the number of cases they've actually been dealing with have actually gone up. So that's a good thing. But the numbers who have been waiting for their appeal to be heard has gone up by nearly 500%. So nearly 6 times, that is, in 2 years. And in the meantime, they're sitting in hotels, and we're looking at a £1.5 billion cost for hotels alone, just for asylum seekers. There are 8,000 more now than in July last year, even though, of course, Labour have smashed the gangs. Remember when they did that? I'm sure we covered it. Basically, one of the issues is there aren't enough lawyers. They've only got enough lawyers to represent half of the claimants because the legal aid fees are so low. Lawyers can't afford to work for it, and they really are too low. They really, really are. So they put an extra 20 million in for that. But I mean, It is just mind-blowing that we've just got so many 42,000 people waiting to appeal. And of course, you don't just get one appeal, you just get appeal after appeal after appeal after appeal.
Julia, I mean, actually, I do think it is disgraceful that this country's our best solution to this problem is to give a 10% pay rise to immigration lawyers that have driven this system to a halt in the first place. If they hadn't spent the last 15 years trying to keep people in this country on the basis of their children's chicken nugget preferences, then maybe we would have a system by which, do you know what, we could actually assess who are the most vulnerable people around the world. Because I tell you who the most vulnerable people are not. It is young, fighting-age males that come across the English Channel, having paid criminal gangs to get here, that present on Dover, all claim they're 16 and 17, miraculously, given that they've got receding hairlines and great big beards. The system is a joke. We're never going to deal with it while we continue to pretend that we are living in a world just after the Second World War, in which you had a small number of genuinely needy refugees. I'm sorry, if you come to this country over the Channel, you are not a refugee. I have my problems with Emmanuel Macron. This man is not a dictator. You are living a perfectly good life in France. You have chosen to break into our country illegally. The only question that should be being asked is, how quickly are you onto the plane? Is it going to be the 3 o'clock or the 5 o'clock return?
Absolutely.
Until we got back to that basic thing, I don't want to hear about it. Shut up and go away.
Here's to all of that. Love to hear your thoughts on all of that. 0344 499 1000. Particularly want to know what you would do to reform disability benefits. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll get your messages up next. This is Talk.
always talk a good game, but this is what I was saying. Even Wes Streeting at the weekend, he even came on talk extraordinarily, which was a first, I think, for him as a minister. And at the end of the day, he can say he's going to do all sorts of things, but unless he actually does them, it doesn't mean anything.
That's where the sort of trust in voter thing comes back, is again, 14 years of the Tories talking a good game, saying they've got all this stuff and never actually delivered. You talked about that poll earlier, I heard you talking about, that showed that Nigel Farage was, you know, on the march in 300 constituencies. They can't afford to talk a big game and then not deliver.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 11:25 is the time. Let's get some of your messages coming in thick and fast about what you would do to reform the disability benefits, because we're expecting that announcement tomorrow from Liz Kendall, the Work and Pensions Secretary, cutting benefits for up to 1 million people. But backlash from Labour backbenchers, of course, who just hand-wring. But isn't the main issue that it's just a load of people who get these benefits who really don't need them and shouldn't get them? Isn't that the main issue? Lots of your messages coming in. Katie says it's not just the benefit system, the whole government needs overhauling. Yeah, Katie, I don't think we've got time for that right now. Greg says, make it more difficult for people to get benefits and review everyone on it. Clearly people are taking the mick. Sean says, stop funding migrant hotels. That would save us money. It's only gone up since Labour got into power. It was going up under the Tories as well, by the way. And also, by the way, that doesn't touch the sides of the cost of benefits for our own people. Not that we shouldn't stop funding it anyway, but if they're not in hotels, there's nowhere else to put them. We're not sending them home. They're all on appeals that take a year. So realistically, they're going to be in local hostels and accommodation. That just boosts costs it probably ends up costing the taxpayer more and competes with other people who are on low incomes to try and get that housing. So again, there's no clear solution there. Lindsay says, we all know that any money saved goes to defence, or better known as Ukraine. Yes, Lindsay, because we need to spend money on defence to defend our country and Western civilization. I'm in favour of that. Darren says cutting benefits means less money for people to spend in the local economy. It also means people will be poorer as food and energy bills keep rising. Well, not if you're cutting benefits from people who could be working, because then they'd get a job and then they'd pay tax and they'd also be spending. Throwing that out there, Darren. Les says, I really don't trust Labour on this. It seems to be more about the PR and sound bites than real reform. And Neil says we have hotels full of illegal migrants living freely at the cost of the taxpayers. That's a good place to start. Let's go to Michelle now. She's on the line in Canterbury in Kent. Hello, Michelle.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. What do you want to say, my darling?
Full disclosure, I do receive PIP.
Yep.
I do receive mobility, and I do have a Motability car.
Yep.
And I'm eternally grateful for it, and it's been an absolute life changer for me.
Do you mind? I mean, feel free not to answer, because I don't want to, impose, in your personal life. But could you give us a rough idea of the disability and why you need those things?
I've worked all my life. I've paid for my own cars, bought my own cars, etc., etc. And unfortunately, was struck down sort of about 2017, 2018 with serious disability, physical disability issues.
Right, OK. So
at the time I had a partner, so it wasn't a problem. We muddled through. And then I didn't have a partner, so I found myself on benefits.
Yeah, but you'd worked all your life. You've done, you paid your bit. You've not been swinging the lead. The help was there when you needed it, which is a good thing, and quite
absolutely.
Right. No shame in that.
I'm eternally grateful.
We're a civilised country. It's what we should be doing. But do you think there are people who are claiming those benefits who shouldn't get them?
This is where my issue comes. I am so grateful, and I know that it's been a game changer for me.
Yeah.
If I didn't have a car to drive around in, I wouldn't leave the house, because why would I go anywhere? I can't walk.
Yeah.
But I can sling a wheelchair in the back of a car, but, and I went for possibly the cheapest one I could go for that I could fit a wheelchair in.
Yeah.
And I love it. And it gives me independence. It gives me a lease of life. And I was hoping to go back into volunteering to get me back into the workplace again. And I was running my own company. And because I was sole trader, if I couldn't do the work, then obviously I wasn't going to make any money. So I had to fold the company.
Yeah.
But wanted to retrain and what have you. And I wouldn't be able to do that without my car.
Yeah.
However, it's not sustainable. So it will stop for all of us.
That's the worry, isn't it? That when they reform it, because these things are always done in a cat-handed way, that actually they end up hurting the people who do genuinely need it. How could it be done in a way that wouldn't hurt people like you who need it, but it would manage to catch the people who don't?
My fear is, and this is going to sound so contentious, that the reforms will be carried out by the same civil servants who couldn't be asked to do their jobs in the first place and let it get in this state.
Yeah,
that's my biggest concern.
That's the worry, exactly. The people the last, certainly, the massive explosion, apologies for the language, by the way, there, the massive explosion in claims in recent years, certainly lockdown onwards, has been partly because we've had telephone assessments.
One of your callers left, I think it was a voice note or a call, and said when people are assessed, they should be assessed properly.
Yeah.
Now, I've never had to lie to the DWP because, sadly, that is my circumstances.
Yeah.
But I don't have to prove it.
How would you prove it?
Well, I have scars all over my body. I have all of the hospital administration.
You've got proper medical assessments. But that's the thing. But that's the thing. Isn't it interesting that people are claiming for mental health issues which are, they're impossible to prove?
You know, anyone can go, oh, look at me, I can't walk. But all of my assessments are carried out over the phone.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Michelle, thank you. Look, we wish you the very best. And again, I hope you understand, no one is attacking people like you. We want to make sure that you get the help you need. We need to have the money to do that. And we can only do that if we haven't got people swinging the lead. Janice is on the line. She's in Poole. Hello, Janice.
Oh, hello, Julia.
Hello. What do you want to say?
Well, I'm just phoning to say that I bought 3 sums up, 2 that work, but 1 that doesn't because he's got severe autism. So he can't work, he can't do anything, he depends on me for everything.
How old is he?
He's just turned 29 last week.
29. And how does the autism affect him? Because obviously we know that's a massive spectrum, and there are people who say they're autistic who carry on a completely normal life, and there are people who are very severely affected. So what sort of impact does it have?
Oh, he has meltdowns like 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Just general things he can't cope with. Anything that changes.
Yeah.
You
No
know,
one's going to employ him. He's not even going to get through a job interview. No one's going to employ him, basically.
Oh no! If you wanted him to make you a sandwich, he could, but it would take him about half an hour.
Right.
So I don't think you'd want to wait half an hour.
No, I don't know. I'm trying to think how long it takes my husband to make one, but I'm not making light of it. But yeah, no, okay. So, and you say, look, so it's not, you know, it's not like you've been mollycoddling and you're writing him off. You've got other kids. You've worked. These kids work. Everything's gone right, but this is a mental health disability. He needs help. So roughly how much money does he get to claim through PIP and all the other benefits?
I think he gets about £1,000 a month.
Yeah, and he lives at home with you.
He has to go to a specialist college for 2 days, and that's costing him, I think, about £3,000 a year.
Right. And just finally, Janice, how do you feel about people who claim that they've got a disability or claim that they've got a disability that impacts them, when it's nothing like what your son lives with? How do you feel about those people?
It gets on my nerves because my husband works and goes around these places doing door entry systems, and he's seen people that say they've got a disability.
Yeah.
They walk out with like a stick, just chuck it in the boot, and then carry on. He says there's nothing wrong with them, but yet they've got a mobility car and they're claiming for everything.
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it? Again, this is my thing, is that, you know, when people are making these claims where they don't really need it or they are defrauding us, they're actually hurting, you know, families like yours. Janice, so appreciate your call. Wish you the very best along with your son and others. 11:34 is the time. Up next, we are going to be talking to Matt Ridley. He's written plenty on what is going on with COVID and the origins of COVID. And it does appear that, well, Boris Johnson was told very early in 2020 the origins of COVID were undoubtedly from the Wuhan lab and not from a wet market. It wasn't an accident. It was something that happened in a lab. And yet that was completely poo-pooed. Who by? Well, none other than Patrick Vallance, now Lord Vallance, a science minister. So what's going on? We'll talk about that with him up next. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 11:36 is the time. Sam Armstrong is still with me. We're also joined in the studio now by former Conservative peer and author and writer Matt Ridley. Very good morning to you. Great to see you.
Good morning.
Now, the reason I want to talk to you today is because of a big story in the Mail on Sunday yesterday when it emerged that Sir Richard Dearlove, former boss of MI6, although already then an ex-spy chief, back in 2020, before we'd even locked down, he had gone to Number 10 when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister with a dossier compiled by top experts saying what they thought the origins of COVID were. Big debate at the time. Was it from the wet markets in Wuhan? Yet, was it someone eating a pangolin or a bat? Or was it from, quite by complete coincidence, the Wuhan lab where they were doing work on coronaviruses? The evidence that he presented to Boris Johnson, which he says the Prime Minister, and with sources close to him suggest he did agree that this was convincing, was completely poo-pooed by a man called Sir Patrick Vallance. Very much in the news, appeared at all those press conferences for those 2 years of the COVID pandemic. He's now Lord Vallance. He was the chief scientific advisor, now a science minister based in the Lords. But he poo-pooed this idea. Now, there is a question mark over why he would poo-poo this idea, and this came up, of course, in your book, your brilliant book, Viral, co-written with Alina Chan, published since the pandemic, about why so many people in high levels in government and in government bodies, both here and in America, working people like Anthony Fauci and others, why they, for some reason, didn't want to publicly accept the idea that COVID had been man-made. What do you think's going on?
Well, I can confirm that Sir Richard Dearlove is right that the information was being given to Boris Johnson and others quite early on, and Dearlove was quicker onto it than I was. It took me a month or so to cotton on to the fact that the lab leak was a real possibility, and that he wasn't. That it was being poo-pooed by the chief scientist and others. Because I've talked to people in Number 10 and I've talked to Boris himself, and he said he was getting advice that, no, it's definitely not a lab leak, you can rule that out, please sign off here. And Boris, to his credit, refused to do so. He remained agnostic on the subject. But it was a real problem for the people inside Number 10 who realised that the lab leak needed to be taken seriously to get any of the scientific advisors to agree to that. And yet even they, behind the scenes, knew this, because Patrick Vallance was on a crucial telephone call on the 1st of February 2020 with Anthony Fauci and Jeremy Farrar and others.
And Anthony Fauci was basically, he was the equivalent of Vallance in America, advising...
And Sir Jeremy Farrar was chief scientist at the Wellcome Trust, and they were on this phone call where they discussed the possibility of a lab leak and the evidence that was strongly pointing that way. And yet, at the end of that phone call, they all agreed that an article would be written, which came out 5 years ago today, incidentally, poo-pooing the idea. It was called Proximal Origin. It fooled me. It fooled a lot of other people.
So they had a conversation. They all agreed in this conversation, and there are emails that were sent since. There's loads of evidence of this conversation, loads of people involved. They all the top scientific and medical advisors to major, to America and British governments, basically agreed it was rather likely that it had come from the Wuhan lab.
The phrase used by the lead author of the article that came out 5 years ago was "so friggin' likely."
So friggin' likely. So, and yet publicly, so they wrote this article that was basically definitive. No, it's not. Anyone who talked about this being the likelihood coming from a lab leak in China was told it was a conspiracy theory, it was disinformation, people were taken off social media, they lost their accounts. Donald Trump...
You were banned on Facebook
if you said that. Until suddenly, randomly, Joe Biden said, a few years later, it probably was a lab leak. Then suddenly there was an acceptable view. Now, why did they want to shut this down? What was the significance of whether or not this was something that had emerged from because someone ate a pangolin that had eaten a bat or something in a wet market in Wuhan, a city pretty much none of us had ever heard of before COVID, and now heard to our cost, rather than something that was cooked up in a lab in Wuhan? And I don't think most sensible people are saying it was deliberately leaked by the Chinese. It was just a lab leak, incompetence, accidental leak that the Chinese then tried to cover up because it made them look bad. Why on earth would the Americans and the British, particularly the scientists, want to cover that up?
Well, I think there were two motives. One was to not upset the Chinese. And I've had this said to me explicitly by senior scientists, we better not find out in case it annoys the Chinese.
Why?
I said to this guy, you don't say that about a plane crash. You didn't say that about the Titanic. You don't say that about Bhopal. You do try and find out so it doesn't happen again. And you don't care who it upsets. But they did. They really did. And for example, Nature magazine, the
which is
House Journal
very,
of Science,
very important,
has just done a big piece saying 4 lessons for virology from the pandemic. Well, they don't mention the lab leak. That's like writing 4 lessons from the maiden voyage of the Titanic without mentioning the iceberg. It's bizarre, and so that was one thing. Please don't let's upset the Chinese. They fund a lot of science. They collaborate with us. They pay for a lot of the expense of publishing journals. That's a big part of it.
They fund a lot of universities and their research.
And the other reason was this might rebound badly on the reputation of science. Scientists might find it harder to get public support for grants, for vaccines, for pharmaceuticals, etc., if the public realises that a mistake has been made within
science. There's a sort
science.
of evil scientists working in a lab in their white coats, and they're the ones who caused all this problem for us.
Well, and what they should have said to themselves was, look, we need to admit that a rogue lab that was doing unsafe work that should never have been done at the wrong biosafety levels, which we know to be true, by the way, was wrong. And then the reputation would have been confined to just one Chinese lab. As it is, they have now had the effect that the whole of science is mistrusted by a large percentage of the population.
Well, and it is. Again,
vaccines and everything.
It's when people like me, and I grew up early on, if the scientists say this or that, it seemed to me that would be true. Now I don't trust a word. And when I see scientific studies, I think, well, hold on a minute, who's funding that? And it's maybe good to be a little bit more critical and to be less trusting. But again, that is something that scientists, and I think they've done it over climate change as well, refusing to have proper discussions about things. They've thrown away the scientific reputation. But come back
to their own reputation.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Come back to what was actually going on in that Wuhan lab, because it always seemed to me to be risible. I mean, absolutely laughable that people would say, no, of course it can't be what's happened in the Wuhan lab. It must just have been just an accidental, case that something's happened in the wet market with all these strange animals that are being kept, some alive, some dead, in these wet markets in China. Because should we say, the circumstantial evidence for it being a lab leak is pretty strong. First of all, what was it they were actually doing at this lab?
Well, there's 40,000 markets in China.
Yeah.
There's one lab in the world that was doing experiments on sarbecoviruses like this, and it's in Wuhan. And the experiments it was doing was to take bat viruses from the wild 1,000 miles away in southern China, bring them all the way to Wuhan, manipulate them, swap their spike genes with some going into others, as a result increasing the infectivity of the viruses sometimes up to 10,000 times. We know that. That's a published experiment.
Why would they want to do that? That's the bit most of us don't get.
The theory was that it was going to enable them to predict and prevent the next pandemic, and then they'd get the Nobel Prize. But that went well, didn't it? They predicted their own pandemic, many people think.
Okay, so but the idea is, we're going to work out how if a disease was terrible, or if a baddie, a James Bond style baddie was doing this work, we would then know how to deal with it.
Yes, in the long run, the aim would be to develop a pan-coronavirus vaccine that would work against any of these dangerous bat viruses, and that's not a sort of risible aim, but it was actually. It turned out that what they were doing was looking for a gas leak with a lighted match.
Couldn't we just, wouldn't it be better to, kill all the bats that might have this virus? Would that not seem a simple solution?
Up till the middle of 2021, we didn't know for sure what, how close they were to making this particular virus. And then a document leak called the Diffuse Proposal, which should have been shown to us right at the start, but took 2 years to come out. And that document said our next plan is to put a thing called a furin cleavage site into a SARS-like virus for the very first time. This is the only SARS-like virus we've ever seen with a furin cleavage site in exactly that location.
So they said they were going to
exactly
do
that
it.
part.
It exists and it killed a lot of people, and we're supposed to pretend that these things aren't linked. Am I not right in thinking also that what was going on in this lab in Wuhan, in the middle of nowhere in China, was actually part funded by the Americans, by American scientific bodies, including the ones headed by Anthony Fauci?
Yes, the US Allergies and Infectious Diseases, National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases, as well as USAID, as well as the Pentagon, all put money that went to this lab.
Surely part of the cover-up then would have been, let's just not embarrass the fact that America has funded this scientific work in China that has caused this massive pandemic.
Well, there's, if you were one of the people who had signed off on sending millions of dollars to the Wuhan lab and this thing happened, you would be inhuman if you didn't desperately want this not to be
come out.
A lab leak.
Because this is relevant. It's relevant in terms of, we should, knowing things anyway is a good thing. It is better that we know facts and know the truth. But it's also very relevant to preventing the next pandemic, because if the last pandemic was caused by this sort of human error, can we please, if we're going to do these sort of experiments, there's an argument not doing them, but if we're going to do them, let's ensure that we've got a body that is overseeing the security and the safety in these labs to prevent something like this happening again. Whether we can or not is a question mark.
The extraordinary thing is there's been no change in biosafety regulations since the pandemic.
This could just happen again tomorrow.
Not only that, but rogue actors are, bad actors are looking at this and worrying about it.
The Iranians, I'm sure, are looking at this. Putin's looking at this.
Exactly.
Xi Jinping, happily.
And by the way, there's quite an important potential lesson in here, which is the puzzling thing about this virus was that it was so infectious from the get-go. That's very unusual for an animal virus. Normally it struggles to transmit between people. The reason may be because it had been in a lab trained on things, so it trained on human cells. So it could be that the main lesson here is that we are much more likely to spark a global pandemic with lab accidents than we are with markets.
Brilliant. So let's carry on doing that and denying that we're doing it and not making it any safer.
I'm afraid so. I mean, it's I didn't start out thinking this. As I said, the first few months I was going around telling people, no, it's probably not a lab leak. These scientists have written this paper saying it isn't. I feel really betrayed on this.
Patrick Vallance, now Lord Vallance, not elected but a government minister, a science minister. He's been poo-pooing all of this all along. He's basically one of the people in charge of governing science in this country. But he's an anti-scientist, because if you don't want to go with the evidence and the facts, you don't want to go with scientific processes, you're not a supporter of science.
Well, I think he's a well-meaning, decent man.
Why do we always think that?
Well, I don't know. I've met him. He's perfectly pleasant and he's tried to do the right thing on other issues. But he is in Parliament now, and therefore there is a method of calling him to account before select committees or at questions. And this needs to happen, because exactly why he suppressed this very important story and keeps doing so, because just in response to the Mail on Sunday article, they said, we're leaving it to the WHO. Well, we know that's what they said to me.
Yeah, we're not doing that again.
And the WHO are hopeless on this.
So good, Rich. You've been absolutely fantastic. There's some wonderful helping to expose this and to help explain it to those of us who are not, science boffins. Matt Ridley, former Conservative peer writer.
And Newcastle United supporter.
And Newcastle, very happy Newcastle United supporter. And author of Viral, co-written with Anita Chan.
And a new book.
Come back in. All of your books are actually brilliant. And your fascinating book, Birds, Sex and Beauty, which sounds a rather different kind of book. I promise we'll get you back in again. Just want to get a quick reaction from Sam Armstrong listening to all of this.
Yeah, I found the thing most shocking was that Sir Richard Dearlove, the former MI6 director or chief, had been the one who had to do it. I can remember at the time, I've never said this before, but one day it just turned up on my desk a big list of some of the evidence from the Wuhan lab's own website of them breaching their own standards for level 4 biosafety stuff, and put it into a newspaper. But there were intelligence officers in this country that felt like they were being stopped from doing their job by a system that just simply didn't want to hear that the open source, blatant information. And actually what happened is, in the 6 months it took for people really to start looking, that the Chinese lab destroyed all of its own databases, all of the publicly owned available information, and there's so much about it that was there, could have been found.
And the usual people mysteriously disappearing as well. Absolutely fascinating. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Do get in touch. More from Sam Armstrong. Big thanks to Matt Ridley. Up next, we are going to be talking about that asylum backlog of rejected claims. It's gone up by almost 500% in just 2 years. So what's going on? This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
Arrest them on the beaches, stick them on a boat, or a barge or anything. The more seasickness you get, the better, in my view, and send them straight back. Or
and illegals and people who commit crimes like raping working class girls, kick all them out.
All of them.
That's a couple of million, 3 million.
But you can't just say mass deportations.
Well, 2 or 3 million is a mass deportation. Needs to be done.
You couldn't do 3 million. Don't talk.
You can do it 10 flights a day would get rid of 1 million people a year.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Left very little time for this, but let's go straight to Danny Shaw, Home Affairs commentator, a former advisor to Yvette Cooper, now Home Secretary. Danny, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Julia.
Apologies, we went far too long with the very brilliant Matt Ridley. I do apologise, but I do want to talk to you about this asylum backlog, where the backlog of rejected asylum seekers' appeals is up almost 500% in just 2 years. And we have, is it something like 42,000 people who are currently waiting to have their appeal heard. What is going on and how much worse is it going to get?
Julia, it's a symptom of a broken asylum system, essentially. The reasons for this huge backlog in appeals is because decisions are being made on asylum cases. It's, a huge number of decisions now being made as the government stepped that up after the election. And with decisions comes refusals of asylum. About 47% of cases are granted asylum, so about half are refused. Many of those, the majority, will go to appeal. You also have problems in the courts. You have a shortage of immigration judges. You have a shortage of lawyers who can represent clients because the legal aid rates paid to lawyers that do this sort of work are so low that they're moving to other kinds of legal work. And you have then the complexity of some of these cases, people making multiple claims and so on, which adds to the time that it takes to deal with these cases. So all in all, that's why you've got this huge spike in asylum appeals.
So you've got a perfect storm, although as Sam Armstrong, who's joined me throughout the show, has pointed out earlier, you know, as if the solution to the problem is going to be more lawyers and more money for lawyers. But I do accept, I mean, absolutely, the legal aid fees are just, you know, don't even cover the train fare to cover the case. I mean, to a certain extent, we have seen speeding up under Tories at the end of their rule and the beginning of Labour, a speeding up of asylum claims being actually tackled. At one point, it was like one a week was being dealt with by those working in the asylum system. So the appeals, obviously, when they get rejected, we're having more cases being dealt with, more cases being rejected, and therefore more appeals. So could you argue that, to a certain extent, it's a victim of its own success, such as we can use the word success?
I mean, a functioning system is a system where cases are dealt with quickly, they're processed, people who have no right to be here are removed, others who are granted are allowed to then move out of asylum accommodation, hopefully find work so that they're not a burden on the taxpayer. That's an asylum system that's working properly. But what we have here is an asylum system that has been blocked for years and years. Before the election, the government essentially stopped making decisions on thousands of claims. So that, you know, that created a problem. And you also have a problem where you have people coming into the country in small boats claiming asylum. You know, the country's borders are porous, so that's not a system that's working well, and that's leading to a large number of people putting in applications. I think the answer, Julia, you know, because I know you don't have a lot of time, is to have a plan for 4 or 5 years. If you try and tackle this by saying, right, OK, we're going to surge the number of people doing these appeals and get them dealt with, what you will find is that you will have an increase in destitution because people whose appeals are rejected will have nowhere to go. They won't be able to get council accommodation and so on. They'll end up sleeping rough in tents. You've got to have a system that all works in lockstep, every single bit working over the next 4 years.
And again, and have the accommodation, but also have the ability to get... It's all very well saying someone's got no right to be here. You've then got to get rid of them, and we don't have a system anymore. I mean, not that the Rwanda system was on the scale that it would have dealt with it, but we're spending £1.5 billion this year, the Refugee Council's forecast. It's going to housing people in hotels. But of course, even if we take people out of hotels, they're put in hostels and they put other accommodation, they're also then competing with other local people for the same accommodation, and so that has and we're paying for that rent as well. A lot of these people are never going to get a job where they're not on benefits of some sort, so we're going to be paying for them either way. I think most people just feel like, you know, the whole system is wrong, and what we need to do is prevent the people from getting here in the first place, which seems like the obvious solution. Danny Shaw, so appreciate you joining us. I do apologise for it being such a short topic, but I'm sure we'll talk with you about this many, many more times in the future. He's a Home Affairs commentator and former advisor to Yvette Cooper before she became Home Secretary. Lots more to talk about, including the local elections coming up. Reform have got a big press conference coming up. They are planning to do very well in those local elections, but how well will they do, and how much of an impact has the battles between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage had? This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, I say it's always great to have your company. Great also to have the company of commentator Sam Armstrong with me for the whole show. Afternoon once again to you.
Good afternoon. Lots
to talk about, and I really want to get your thoughts on the first topic of the hour, which is a plot we're told is developing among some Conservative and Reform figures to unite the right to oust the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch. This comes after it was revealed that Reform UK leader Nigel Farage had met with Dominic Cummings. He, of course, we know who Dominic Cummings is, Mr Barnard Castle fan and Boris Johnson's former Chief of Staff, to discuss the future of the Tories. Well, Reform UK right now is holding a press conference to talk about the upcoming local elections. So we'll bring you anything from that is worth knowing about. We'll be talking about that with Sir John Curtis, the polling expert, in just a couple of moments. Also, we're going to be talking to Amanda Spillman. She's the former head of Ofsted. She's accused the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, of putting the interests of teaching unions ahead of those of children in a scathing attack on the school reforms. Plus, and these are the stories that just, frankly, break your soul that they're still going on, Shakespeare's birthplace, the Stratford-upon-Avon, is said to be decolonised after academics, wait for it, said presenting the playwright as a universal genius benefits the ideology of white European supremacy. These people are stark, staring mad. Anyway, it's coming up to 4 minutes past 12. Welcome to the Home of Common Sense. Sam Armstrong, first of all, is there a cunning plot to unite the right, a bid to get through the local elections at the beginning of May, where Reform hoped that, well, they were certainly hoping they would win them, if all of the councils that were going to have local elections had actually put up all the seats, but we know lots of major local councils which would have fallen very well for Reform UK will not be going ahead with their local elections due to major reforms. And it's kind of a Labour-Tory agreement, some would say, a nice little deal. But idea is that Kemi Badenoch, her Tory party not doing very well, behind Reform and Labour in the polls still, could do badly. The move to unite the right and oust Kemi Badenoch. Is that happening?
Well, let's start with the physical mechanics of the polling. At present, Nigel Farage has had his own personal poll ratings have gone down a little bit over the past month for two reasons, I think. Some of it on the Rupert Lowe, some of it on Ukraine, Russia, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So, but you're now in a position in which after all of that, Reform's poll ratings as a party have not been hit. If anything, they've ticked up another 1 point. And I think you're now in a position in which the Tory party and the Reform party are both sat around 20 to 27 points in the polls, and that figure is just not going to change. Now, the trouble comes with the British electoral system, which is first past the post.
Yep.
And basically, that punishes you incredibly hardly for being a divided philosophical movement. So the Labour Party has always been hit because you've had people going off to the Greens, to the Lib Dems, to whomever. And as a result, the Tories tend to have won more elections. You're now in a position in which, comparatively, the left of British politics is united, predominantly around the Labour Party. You're going to see them, I think, by the time of the next election, being on about 30 to 35% in the polls. Whereas the Tories and Reform stuck on 2025. All of that means that we are guaranteed another 5 years of Keir Starmer's government.
Right.
So the electoral incentive, the imperative for Reform and Tories, for one of two things to happen. Either that one of those parties wins out and comes through and dominates the other, or for some kind of pre-election as opposed to post-election arrangement is massive and overwhelming.
So in seats where Reform are likely to win, the Tories stand down. Where the Tories are likely to win, Reform stands down. Very interesting. Well, I wonder what you'd make of that. You give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Would you be in favour of some sort of Unite the Right pact? Love to also hear your thoughts on how you would reform disability benefits. Either way, same number to call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. Send us a message on X at talkTV. Call to charge the national rate. Text cost 1, standard network rate message. Right, well, let's talk about all of this with Sir John Curtis. He's a polling expert, professor of politics at the University of Strathclyde. Good afternoon to you, Sir John.
Good afternoon,
Thank
Julia.
you for joining us. All right, there's lots to talk about because Reform right now are just hosting a press conference, and we understand that Nigel Farage he's welcomed 29 new councillors to Reform UK. That's ahead of the May local election campaign, people who have moved from other parties, largely, I think, the Tory party. We understand that they are hoping to get something like 200 seats in the local elections. So let's just focus on the local elections first up. First of all, how big an impact has the cancelled local elections in various different authorities? How big an impact is that going to have in terms of who is perceived to be the winner and the loser of these elections?
Probably not as much as Reform have been arguing. Yes, it's true that the elections have been cancelled in 9 councils, but we've still got 23 council elections. It's a relatively small bunch, but it was always going to be a relatively small bunch. Those are virtually all of them, apart from 3 of them, are councils that are controlled by the Conservatives. Yep. They will give us a pretty good test of the ability of Reform to do well in predominantly Conservative areas. At the same time, and intriguingly in contrast, there are also 6 mayoral contests, 4 of which have been defended by Labour. The other 2 are new. These are all much more in more Labour parts of the United Kingdom, and they will give us an opportunity to assess whether or not Reform can advance in more Labour parts of the country. So in a sense, there will be 2 rather different stories to look at.
Yeah.
And I think the truth is there's still going to be enough at stake that if indeed Reform are going to do well, they're going to demonstrate it. Actually, there is one potential advantage to Reform of there being fewer council elections. Of course, the big challenge to Reform, and it's one of the things I'll be interested in hearing in the wake of this press conference, is how many candidates are they going to put up? There are about 1,500 council seats being fought over on the 1st of May. And I think a real challenge to Reform is whether or not indeed they are fighting most of those or not. And the fact that there are now somewhat fewer councils balloting makes it rather easier perhaps for Reform to find the activists to stand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very interesting. But again, it's interesting how Reform are taking votes from not just the Tories, but also Labour. And there had been this view, I think, from lots of Labour folks, which was, well, we're not really bothered by Reform. We can just criticise Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, whoever else, slag them off. But it's not really affecting us because it's splitting the Tory, the right-wing vote, taking votes from the Tories. They know perfectly well that would have massively harmed the Tories at the last election and helped that huge, big, loveless, but nevertheless landslide that Labour won. So not a problem. But of course, it is if they can take Labour votes as well, then that's a very different kind of threat.
Well, life's a bit more complicated than that. It certainly is true that Reform are taking some votes off Labour. Actually, I think Labour's problem is much more fundamental than simply Nigel Farage. If you look at the polls, they are losing votes to everybody. They're losing votes to the Tories, they're losing votes to the Liberal Democrats, they're losing votes to the Greens. One of the problems facing Labour as a party that's tried to put itself in the centre of our politics is that does mean that as people become disillusioned, as they have become with the Labour government relatively quickly, they are at risk of going off to the left and to the right. The reason why Reform are potentially able to win Labour seats is not necessarily simply because they take votes off Labour, but whether or not they can take votes off the Conservatives in these seats. And certainly in the moment, the national opinion polls still show Reform finding it easier to pick up votes off the Tories than they are off the Labour Party.
Right, that's very interesting. And how much should we read into these elections at the start of May? Because at the end of the day, any government that gets elected will see a backlash in the polls. Fewer people vote in local elections than general elections, so it tends to be people who feel much more strongly. And you're often more likely to feel more strongly because you're cross about something. A lot of people view local elections, as they often do, and we'll come to by-elections as well in a moment, as kind of a free vote. Well, I've got the government, I'm cross with something they're doing, but it's a free vote, doesn't really matter. So how much should we read into whatever the results are?
Well, I think the truth is they do provide valuable intelligence, but you do need to compare local elections with local elections. The most obvious point is that the Liberal Democrats always do better in local elections than they would do in any contemporaneous Westminster election. And that does therefore also tend to mean that Labour do less well than they would in a contemporaneous election. And of course, one other complication we've got with that comparison this time is, the seats that are being fought this time were last contested in May 2021. That was the day when Boris Johnson won the Hartlepool by-election and the Labour Party did badly. Now, that does therefore mean it is essentially the Conservatives in predominantly Conservative voting areas whose seats are on the line. They got about 900 of the 1,500 seats that are up for grab last night. So it is very much a defensive exercise. But at the end of the day, if Reform really are going to convince us that they are doing anything like as well as the national polls are saying, they A, need to find the activists, and B, they do need to be taking a significant number of seats off the Conservatives in these areas.
And let's talk about the likelihood of that and where Reform are in the polling. We've seen, opinion poll after opinion poll, which is routinely now putting certainly Reform ahead of the Tories, sometimes ahead of Labour as well. But again, as Sam Armstrong was touching on, our first past the post system does mean that actually you can, having 25% of the votes, depending on where they are, has a very different outcome for different parties.
Well, indeed, but equally 25% of the vote has a different outcome, whether as a result of that you're still third or whether or not you are first. So Reform's problem, quote unquote, is that their vote is geographically evenly spread, and that therefore, when they're running third, as they did last July, they find it difficult to convert votes into seats. But if you're at if you've got a geographically evenly spread and you're at 25%, still a bit of a disadvantage, but it's going to become less of a disadvantage. And certainly, I've seen one projection, I don't necessarily speak for it, which suggests that Reform might manage to get over 400 seats in these local elections, because the point is, yes, they're only at 25%, but nobody else is at more than 25%. And that is going to mean that in places, Reform are running first if they're matching their opinion poll position. And if you're first and you've got a geographically evenly spread vote, the system begins to work to your advantage.
Yeah, and it's certainly various incarnations of parties that Nigel Farage has led. He's got a very strong history, European elections and the like. And we know, the impact that has had on Tory policies and Tory party leaderships has been huge over the years. Of course, those elections, of course, were a proportional representation, not first past the post. So it's very, very different. We have got another first past the post test. So we've got the likelihood very soon, the Runcorn and Helsby by-election. This is the seat belonging to Mike Amesbury, who's standing down after being convicted of assault and getting a suspended, I don't know how, a suspended sentence. Reform seem to be polling ahead there. How big a big sort of, a big rocking of the system would it be if Reform actually won that by-election? Well,
let's pick up both the points you make. I think one of the fundamental things that Nigel Farage's various parties have never previously done is to really embed themselves strongly within our local government system. They had some success around 2013, 2014, 2015. But the real question is, during the course of this parliament, can they become as much of the architecture of local government in this country as their other principal rivals? And that's what happens this May is going to give us a first indication whether they can do that. More broadly on Runcorn, yes, we've had one poll. There's been some debate about its accuracy. Certainly, I think we're looking to Reform to do well in this by-election. Whether or not they can win it, well, who knows? But certainly bear in mind, when UKIP under Nigel Farage's previous leadership were fighting by-elections in the Parliament before 2015, the only ones they were ever able to win were ones where defecting Tory MPs stood down and refought their seats. If they did actually manage to win Runcorn, this would be the first time that they've managed to win a seat afresh in a by-election.
So that would be fairly seismic. So
it would be a notable moment. Yeah.
What do you make of this talk of unite the right? A lot of people in the Conservative Party who lost their seats, lost their jobs in government, who argue that, with Reform there, no matter what level of support they've got, we are going to have a divided right wing in this country, and that means we're going to get another Labour landslide, maybe not as big as it has been this time round, but another big Labour majority in the next election, because of the seat. If the right wing vote is split, then that's what happens. What do you think the likelihood is of that result happening, another Labour landslide, no matter how unpopular Labour government, and B, what would a unite the right campaign look like that would actually, I don't know, deliver for either of those parties?
Oh, okay. I mean, I wouldn't be putting too much money on a Labour landslide at this point in time, given that Labour support's fallen more rapidly, more quickly than any newly elected government in British history. So let's park that one for a while. Sure, the division on the right is important. I don't think anything's going to happen in the short run for two obvious reasons. One is Nigel Farage was on the record as saying he would only go back into British politics, which he decided to do in the middle of the election campaign, if he thought there was a chance of displacing the Conservatives as the principal party of the right. So Nigel Farage, I think, at the moment will be concerned to try and demonstrate that his party could actually replace the Conservatives. Kemi Badenoch, although many people regard her as on the right of the Conservative Party, is very clearly of the view that she doesn't want to be dealing with reform, and she reckons that under her leadership she can turn things around. And of course we are going to get the beginning of an internal party consultation tomorrow, which is the direction in which she is proposing to go. So neither leader is going to be keen on this point in time, which is part of the reason why, therefore, in fact, this Unite the Right movement at the moment seems to be, to some degree, pressure inside the Conservative Party to perhaps change that stance. But I think we're going to have to wait for a fair while until we see what is the result of what at the moment, yes, will be something of a war of attrition between Conservative and Reform before we see whether anything happens between the elections.
But neither side is going to sort of make any nicey moves until they feel that they need to, unless or until. What has been the impact of these battles going on between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe? Was one of his 5 MPs, no longer a Reform MP. In fact, now the Gaza group of MPs now has more MPs than Reform does. What do you make of that battle? Has there been much impact? Because there was some interesting polling that suggested, even I think 7 out of 10 Reform voters didn't actually recognise the picture of Rupert Lowe. With all due respect to him and a lot of the great campaigning he's done, actually most people weren't paying attention to this. But has it had an impact?
I think it's difficult to discern an impact so far. If you look at the polls that have been done since this story broke, yes, I think I can find you one where Reform is down, but I can then find you a couple of others where it's up very slightly. I think more broadly what is true is that probably the rise in Reform support began to tail off at towards the end of last month. That's in February. They seem now to be at about 25%, and they now seem to be sticking at around 25%. So I think the question that faces Reform now is, as it were, have they reached the peak Reform? Have they maxed out at least the group of people that they've been managing to appeal to during the course of the 6 months? They've had 6 months of pretty much continuous growth. It may just be now that that's come to a halt, but certainly I don't see any signs so far of any marked decline in Reform support.
I mean, it's a very interesting time in British politics, but again, it's all very different, isn't it, from what's been happening in Europe, where, of course, they do have proportionate representation. But then even then, we've often seen parties that don't make the sort of the Giorgia Meloni's party and others which have made the jump into power, but they often are frozen out by centre-right and centre-left and hard left, basically keeping them out of power.
Well, look, Julia, virtually all of what we used to call Western Europe, i.e. before the Berlin Wall, has seen a fundamental change in the party system, the parties that voters are choosing between during the course of the last 20, 30 years. The UK has been quite remarkable hitherto in there not being that change. The July election raised the question as to whether or not the Conservative and Labour duopoly was now facing a bigger challenge than ever before. Reform is part of that story, but so also are the Greens. Oh, by the way, the Democrats are up a bit as well now in the opinion polls. The truth is we've got a more fragmented electorate than we've had for some, well, frankly, ever since the 1920s. And we do indeed live in interesting times, and none of us quite know how this is going to play out.
Just to let you know, by the way, we've just been keeping an eye on the Reform press conference. Nigel Farage has been speaking, but Zia Youssef, the Reform chairman, he said that Reform is going to stand candidates in all 1,600 seats which are at stake on May the 1st. What do you make of that?
That will be important if it is indeed they do manage to find all these candidates. And if they do so, it will in itself be an indication that Reform's project of beginning to turn itself into a political party with a regular local party organisation everywhere, something the Eurosceptic right have hitherto failed really to achieve, that they're making progress on that. So that in itself will be important. And then the question will be, how well do these candidates do? Many of them, of course, may well be novices and may find fighting local elections maybe in some cases a bit more difficult than they anticipate. But then, do they indeed then manage to pick up a significant vote and be a significant number of seats?
It's going to be absolutely fascinating. Oh, now we both love our politics, and it's always good when things aren't always obvious, because we keeps us both in a job. Sir John Curtis, polling expert, Professor of Politics, University of Strathclyde, and all-round guru on elections. Always so good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Sam Armstrong, really interesting what he has to say on all of those topics, but it is going to be fascinating to see how well or not well Reform do. That's kind of where everyone's looking. But the future, Kemi Badenoch, your Tory party leader, that is going to rest on how well another party does.
Yeah, I think Reform have got unlucky with actually the exact council elections that have been cancelled.
The 9 that have been cancelled are the ones which would have been strong Reform.
These were all Conservative areas, but just 2, for example, that have been cancelled, Kent and Essex, both of which are the kinds of councils that a resurgent or an upcoming Reform party that was on its way to Downing Street would be hoping to take.
Those elections will happen in, say, a year's time. However, it's about momentum, isn't it? It's about being seen to be pushing on.
That's right. And actually, in some ways, it might be the best thing that ever happens to Reform, which is that they get a good result this year, but then next year coming up, they've got not only all of these held back councils that they're likely to do very good at, but also the Welsh elections next year.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest test of British politics over the next couple of years. What happens in Wales? Because it is absolutely possible, looking at polls, that Wales could go Reform. And then you've got potentially a Reform First Minister, certainly the largest party in the Senate, from Reform, and then all bets are off.
It's going to be absolutely fascinating. Never ever tell me that politics is boring. 12:24 is the time. I'd love to hear your reaction, especially the Reform are going to they're going to stand 1,641 candidates on May the 1st in local elections. Where are they going to get them all from? I mean, these people take years to be found for other parties, and how well are they going to vet them after what happened last time? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. We'll get to more of your calls coming in about how you would reform disability benefits up next. This is Talk.
potholes don't seem to be being repaired.
No.
And bins don't seem to be collected. I mean, some councils are talking about collecting them every 3 weeks.
Well, they're on strike in Birmingham. They've got rats up there the size of cats. You know, people are going, we can't do anything. The bin men have gone on strike because it's so dangerous now. They don't want to get bitten by these rabid rats. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I think most of us remember the day a few years ago when actually your bins were collected every single week.
Yeah.
And we were paying a huge amount less. So you're sort of wondering, where's the money going? Well, it's going on all the renewable stuff, it's going on DEI, all of this good stuff. Wokery has taken over.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Don't forget, coming up in just a few moments, we are going to be talking to the former Chief Inspector of Schools at Ofsted. That is Amanda Spielman. She has launched a scathing attack on the Education Secretary over the latest reforms to schools that are being planned, which says basically giving into teaching unions rather than caring about the needs of pupils. But let's get to your messages coming in about how would you reform disability benefits after just the latest, just shocking figures on how much it costs and how many people, particularly younger people, are now claiming huge thousands of pounds a year from the taxpayer for disability, largely now mental health disabilities. Billy says they want to stop benefits for disabled people. I'm pretty sure more money is wasted trying to look after illegal migrants than British people. Get rid of Labour now. I mean, Billy, you're wrong. You're wrong. You can do, you can do both, but no, benefits for disabled people vastly outstrips. And anyway, the whole point is, don't we want to stop benefits for people who aren't disabled? Isn't that the point? Gary says too little too late with the laughing stock of the world, makes no difference. Will says, what would he do? He says nothing at all. We don't need to reform disability benefits, we need to cut fraud. But people are able to claim and not be considered fraudulent, even when they are. Linda says, make every claim subject to a personal interview. Well, that'd be a start, wouldn't it? Steve says, scrap Motability and start again. Only giving a vehicle to people who genuinely need it as they are disabled rather than dish them out if you have depression or anxiety. Jim says, to be honest, I'm not surprised young people want to sign on. Everything's too expensive and they don't have enough money. Do you know what I did when I was poor and I didn't have enough money when I was young? I got another job. For God's sake, this attitude. This country is going to the dogs if we carry on with that attitude. Let's go to your phone calls now. Chris is on the line. He's in Epsom. And Chris, you want to talk about the conversation we've just been having about local elections, Runcorn, and this talk about uniting the right, the Tories and Reform coming to some sort of pre-election pact. What do you make of it?
Well, morning, Julia. Morning, Sam. I've never belonged to a political party in the past, but I did join Reform about 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. But there's something that you've missed out as well, where you answer, John, which you're in that news cycle in the Westminster bubble sort of thing. There are a lot of people that I talk to, friends and neighbours, that wouldn't join any party.
Yeah, most people don't join a party. I've never joined a party.
They intend. I joined because I felt so strongly that my 25 quid I was happy to give to the cause. Yeah. But there's many people that I speak to that are absolutely going to vote Reform, but they'd only say that in tight-knit circles. They wouldn't advertise the fact. They wouldn't put a Reform flag outside their house or posters in the window. Yeah. But that's a bit like the Trump thing. And I think there's going to be a big surprise at the local elections. But I do feel that depending on what happens on May the 1st, I think that Sam is absolutely right about Reform and Conservatives being stuck around 26, 27%, Labour at 30%.
Yeah.
If there's not some sort of pre-general election deal, as I say, depending on what happens in May, then we will be stuck with Starmer for another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's worrying. I mean, John Curtis was saying it wouldn't be a landslide. It doesn't have to be a landslide or even a big majority. If they're the biggest party, they're the biggest party. But I agree with you on the reform issue. I know an awful lot of people who, I mean, staunch Labour people for years and years and years, who now say they massively support what Nigel Farage says on reform policies, on immigration and other things. But I doubt very much if they've told a lot of their friends that.
No, the thing is, I mean, I come from a real conservative background.
Yep.
My grandfather had greengrocer shops in Fulham, but he had what was called total recall. He'd memorised the whole of Shakespeare's works, including the sonnet.
Wow.
And he read Hansard's every day. And he didn't play sport like cricket or football. He went to Labour Party meetings and completely destroyed them with the knowledge that he had from Hansard's and the facts and figures. So much so that they wanted him to stand as an MP, but he wouldn't because he loved his job. Now, my father, rest in peace, lost him 2 years ago. He worked until he was 85 in the family business, staunch conservative, but towards the end, we didn't recognise the Tory party that gave me. I left school with no exams, no qualifications whatsoever. I started work at just before 16.
Yeah. But you're saying, I'm just sorry because I've got to go to a break. But you say you just don't recognise the party as it is right now. Hence the joining reform. Chris, I do appreciate you calling. Thank you very much indeed. Do call again as soon as possible. Right now, though, it's time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer.
How'd you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
A very, very good luck to you. Do not want to miss out on the gig of the decade. 12:34 is the time. Up next, going to talk to a former Ofsted chief, that's Amanda Spielman, about why she is not happy with the government's latest reforms to schools. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong still with us. And, of course, delighted to be joined now by the former Chief Inspector of Ofsted. That's Amanda Spillman. A very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, you're on the front page of on the newspapers today, attacking the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, saying that she's putting teaching unions' interests ahead of the interests of children. What do you not like that she's planning to do?
There's a whole set of changes that are being made. One around restricting the freedoms that academies have. One, a curriculum and assessment review where we're waiting to see what's coming. Putting the teacher training standards under review, and also some significant changes to inspection. And they add up. And first of all, it's not clear that these are based on sort of real evaluation of there being a specific problem. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses of what's there at the moment? And secondly, they add up to something that's very clearly edging towards always putting the interests of adults, the kinds of things that please union, further up the pecking order, and things that are good for children a bit further down. As Chief Inspector, my role was to look at things from children's point of view and parents' point of view. And I do think we're at a point where parents should be feeling some concern.
Well, indeed. I mean, we know actually one of the few really strong successes of the Tory years was actually the improvement in standards in state schools. Part of that was having academies and giving more independence to good heads and good academy chains to just turn things around. I've been to a few of the schools where just absolute turnaround, and in particular for the children who most need it, who come from homes where school wasn't valued and parents are highly educated, and these children's lives are being turned around, and it's magnificent. And the international data, the comparisons with other countries have shown categorically schools in England have got better. Why would what the government is planning to do bring down standards and hurt children, though?
Well, first of all, the policy of the last 20 years of generally increasing autonomy in the system seems to be a contributor to this trend of improvement. The curriculum reforms, the changes to inspection to really focus on substance and integrity, changes to the initial teacher training standards and early career framework. Without sort of analysing the effect of those more closely, it's impossible to know which bits have really been part of this and which bits do need tweaking. And of course, there are always things that will need tweaking and adjusting. But it feels as though we're in danger of discarding a lot wholesale and then going, whoops, in 3 or 5 years, maybe it wasn't such a good idea. It would be great to do this work first.
Yeah, it's old-fashioned, isn't it, to do that research first? And again, the whoops is all very well when it's something that doesn't impact someone's life forever. But children are only going to be in, year 7 once, or year 8 once, or year 4 once. I mean, that it does matter, doesn't it? I suppose my big wariness is if the teaching unions approve of something, I'm genuinely now wary, given their appalling behaviour over lockdown, particularly the National Education Union, which put not even the needs of teachers, it was just the wants of teachers. There was no evidence that teachers suffered any more from COVID or from COVID deaths at all than other people out at work. And I know you, of course, were Chief Inspector at Ofsted during those COVID years, and you spoke out from very early on about your concerns about children missing school. How much of that impact is still there in the system?
It's clear that there's some, but it's very hard to unravel what specifically lockdown, what is other social changes, what is things like smartphones. But I think the bottom line is it's clearly a tough environment for schools at the moment. We should be celebrating the good work that most schools do. We should be celebrating the successes, and we should be taking note of the fact that we've got many, many people coming to Britain from other countries to see what England has done. So there's a curious asymmetry just at the point that lots of people are looking to us to see what has contributed to the success of the English system in recent years. We're in danger of waving goodbye to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very frustrating, that, isn't it? I mean, how much do you think there's an issue with schools seem to be almost working as, you know, social workers. I've got a very good friend who's a head teacher. He says he's kind of social services and the riot squad at the same time, and doesn't get to do any teaching anymore. And lots of teachers say that they're dealing with discipline, they're dealing with children with mental health problems, with behavioural problems. Every child seems to have a label now of, you know, ADHD, autism. We've got 2 children in every class of 30 on average are claiming a disability or sickness or incapacity benefit of some sort. I mean, that wasn't the case when you were at school or when I was at school or most of our audience was at school. How big an issue is that in terms of actually getting round to teaching anything?
It's a pretty staggering shift, and the propensity to label, the incentives and distortions that a poorly designed benefit or support system can create. Clearly, we are at the point that systems that were designed with the best of intent to support individuals and to help schools aren't quite working as intended. The whole SEND system really could do with some much more fundamental reforms than anybody's been willing to contemplate in the last decade. The 2014 changes didn't do what was hoped, and the most recent review didn't really address that.
Yeah.
But schools need to be first and foremost places to educate children. They can't be all things to all people. And I've also consistently pushed back when people have reached for schools to solve every social problem.
Cleaning the teeth, feeding the kids, mental health, dealing with the mobile phone issue. It's kind of like, do we leave anything to parents anymore?
Parents have an important job to do, and talking about the really boring things like getting children properly potty trained before they start in reception, that matters. It's people were really surprised. I think I was the first person to start talking about the problem 7 years ago, something like that. And I remember I was on a platform with Alistair Campbell the day I made a speech about it, and the world was really surprised and said, "Is it really an issue?" And I said, "Yes, it is."
And then people started asking the teacher. I have to say, I was absolutely flabbergasted that there were parents who apparently were so feckless and useless and lazy, they couldn't be bothered to potty train their kids. And I'm thinking, so, well, you think it's less bother for your kid to be able to use the loo than you to have to spend a fortune on nappies or to have to, you know, change their pants and their jogging bottoms every 10 minutes. I've always found that utterly bizarre. So who are the parents not doing that? I mean, I'm assuming they're the same parents who don't give their kid a proper meal, don't clean their teeth and don't do anything else.
Well, that's not something I can comment on, Julia, because one of the things we never did at Ofsted was go into houses and say what are the parents like. We were just looking at the problem from the
schools were left with.
But getting that focus that schools are there first and foremost to educate, and that we cannot allow teachers and heads to be sucked away into trying to solve everything else. The constraints on social services, the substantial reductions in funding, there's no question that has pushed more work on to schools. So my plea is always to make sure that each individual service is properly funded. Don't look at schools as being the place to pick up.
Catch-all. Can I just ask you, just finally, what do you make of the government's policy for VAT on school fees for private schools? We've now got, I mean, I think Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor's had 4 top barristers, top KCs to defend her case against a group of parents of disabled children who make up a huge number of those who are at private school, attending, you know, vital schooling for children with severe learning disabilities that simply not available in the state system. What do you make of that decision to put VAT on private school fees?
Well, it is a real worry, as you say. There's one set of children with very severe disabilities and problems of various kinds, and government may be focusing on that. But there's also quite a lot of children who wouldn't qualify for a formal statement of special educational needs, but who nonetheless have not flourished in mainstream schools, who've got lesser kinds of difficulties, and parents have felt they've had to find an alternative. It's making it really, really hard for parents to do what they think is best for their children. And it has made us an international outlier. I don't think I know of any other country where this kind of tax is applied to education services that parents buy.
Yeah, indeed. It's very unusual, isn't it? Amanda Spillman, lovely to talk to you. I so appreciate it. I'm so glad you are still out and about, sort of passing commentary. You've always been a voice of reason on this show. Former Chief Inspector of Ofsted, Amanda Spillman there. She was there from 2017 to 2023. Sam Armstrong, your thoughts? Just going back to the reforms. I mean, the former Ofsted Chief attacking the Education Secretary, I mean, is quite something. What do you make of the reforms that Bridget Phillipson is planning?
I think Bridget Phillipson is the most dangerous minister within this Labour
government. Have you heard of Ed Miliband?
I'm afraid.
What about Rachel Reeves?
I'm afraid I think this woman is seriously dangerous, because I fundamentally think that how we educate our children is the most important thing we do, because that is the future for our country. And Bridget Phillipson is an out-and-out class warrior that is determined to give the unions exactly what they want. And I'm sorry, but teachers' unions, they represent the adults in the classroom, they don't represent the children. And the effect of this bill is that Michaela Academy in Wembley, which educates
Catherine
Birbalsingh School, which educates some of this country's most deprived children to the very highest level, that Bridget Phillipson is going to go into that school, which has the best scores in the country, and say, stop what you're doing right now and teach my nationally approved union set curriculum using my methods. And the effect will be those kids, rather than being given the very best start in life and fantastic opportunity to come out of frankly difficult circumstances, they're going to be damned to a life of mediocrity. And I just think that's so wrong.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. 12:48 is the time. Your thoughts always welcome on all the topics we're talking about. 0344 499 1000. Up next, going to talk about the utter madness of Shakespeare's birthplace being decolonised because, you know, it's racist and white supremacy, to talk about what a genius he was, and the NHS being told to stop using the word midwife. Deep sighs, everyone. This is Talk.
The Human Rights Act was passed by UK Parliament, it's applied by UK judges, and people who go to court, right, because we're a free country, they can appeal. They can go to court and they can appeal, and we have a process, and we cannot say justice is too expensive. Justice is a process that everybody who lives in Britain, every citizen in Britain, should have access to. And the idea there should be some penny pinching approach or some approach that says you're brown, you don't have access to.
No, hang on. I've really got to come back on this. That is absolutely outrageous to suggest that.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong still with me. Delighted to be joined now by Connor Tomlinson, who's a writer at Courage Media. Good afternoon to you, Connor.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Two stories I want to talk to you about, and both of them they're kind of the break my soul stories of the wokedom. We keep thinking the wokedom thing's over, but no, the madness still continues. William Shakespeare's birthplace in Stratford-upon-Avon, of course, is being decolonised following concerns. Who from? About the playwright being used to promote white supremacy. Now, this is Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust. They own buildings linked to the Bard in Stratford-upon-Avon, and they have archival material as well. And they want to decolonise it, they say, to create a more inclusive museum experience. First of all, how is celebrating Shakespeare, yes, a white man, promoting white supremacy, and how do you decolonise that?
Well, there's a careful conflation here, if you notice, by Dr. Helen Hopkins, who's the academic behind this. She works at the University of Birmingham. Birmingham, a place which I would argue, after decades of mass migration, has seen a lot of cultural colonialism of its own. It's not exactly the nicest looking place in the world. But anyway, Helen Hopkins, who's dedicated her life to rubbishing something that she purports to enjoy studying, has said that not only is Shakespeare benefiting the ideology of white supremacy, but she's also said that it's a symbol of British cultural superiority and Anglo-cultural supremacy, to which I say, yeah, it is. Because funnily enough, Anglo culture, the English spoken word, has produced some of the best literature around the world. Now, of course, Germans have Goethe, the Japanese have Murakami, but they pale in comparison to Keats, Chaucer, Byron and Shelley, cads that they are, and of course the innovative genius of Shakespeare, to whom there are entire conspiracy theories because of his unparalleled prolificness, that he wasn't a real man and it was outsourced to an entire group of playwrights. Nobody else has that.
Also, he was probably trans. I mean, probably. I mean, everyone was in the past now. But this is the thing. So when we big up, as the kids might say, they probably don't say that anymore, big up Shakespeare and talk about how, he's the epitome of fantastic writing and creativity, that is somehow promoting British cultural superiority and Anglo-cultural superiority, and part of there's a white, Anglo-centric, Eurocentric and West-centric worldview that continues to do harm in the world today. So unless we're bigging up, we're saying he's good, but he's just as good as the most famous Indian playwright or Chinese playwright or a playwright from, from Nigeria, then we are being white supremacists. This is really bizarre. This is clutching at the most bizarre woke straws, is it not?
It is, and I'm not going to do what most people would come on various TV stations and do to defend Shakespeare by saying, well, for its time, Othello was incredibly progressive, and hey, Twelfth Night might have been a trans allegory. I'm bored of that. Do you know why? Because these people aren't listening. What these people are disingenuous, grifting, race communists who couldn't write a story to save their life, and so they have to tear down everything great about our civilization in order to further their own revolutionary goals. Whether it's Frantz Fanon, the wretched of the earth, calling to execute colonial peoples, or whether it's the modern critical race theorists who say, well, we need to discriminate against white people in the present in order to correct for historical injustices like slavery, which, by the way, the British Empire and even the Americans cleaned up at a historically unprecedented rate compared to the rest of the world, like the kingdoms of Benin that were still practicing slavery against other Africans. I'm just going to dismiss it out of hand as, well, you know what I hear decolonisation as? You just really don't like white people. Turns out I don't have a racial prejudice against white people or black people, so I don't have to listen to you. Thank you very much and goodbye.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it is just a grift. It really is a grift, because these people make a lot of money out of this. They get funding for research. They get taken seriously. Idiots like us talk about them on the telly and the radio, which we perhaps should just stop doing. And I would stop doing if it wasn't the fact they do have an impact. But what I find extraordinary is that as a result of this woman's writing and other people saying, the Trust has decided to organise events. Now, this trust is Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust. It's a clue in the name. But they've decided to organise events celebrating a Bengali poet. I don't know what the hell that's got to do with Shakespeare. You're not the Bengali Birthplace Trust. You're Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. But also a Romeo and Juliet-inspired Bollywood dance workshop. Again, I don't know why that's happening. It's got nothing to do. I mean, okay, it's got a link vaguely, but why? This is the thing. It's what it is basically. It's not about decolonising the world from the impact of Britain. And by the way, sorry if you were colonised by us, but better us than pretty much anyone else over the history of time. But they're actually trying to colonise our culture. They're actually trying to destroy our culture, which, by the way, is, again, one of the superior cultures the world has ever had because it's based on liberal democratic values.
Well, sure. I mean, it's not just based on liberal democratic values. I mean, liberalism is basically English tradition taken out of England and exported everywhere else, which is actually why it doesn't work in a lot of places it's been tried, because it doesn't have the same traditions and customs. What this is a resentment of success, because these are wretched and insecure people who want things that they've never earned, and so they point at the successful, try to tear it down, and hope that in the vacuum which nature abhors, they can fill it with their own empowerment and self-enrichment.
And it doesn't work, because most people just think it's mad. If we don't speak out about it, we don't talk about it, we don't stop it. I just find it in literally one sentence, because time is against us. The NHS apparently has been told to stop using the word midwife because it's not inclusive of transgender people, even though, of course, the whole point of it is mid means with, it's with wife. So basically it's the people working with the women who are giving birth. And given that it's only women that give birth, I don't know why that has got anything to do with trans anyway.
These are, again, sad, insecure people who are so openly in revolt against their own consciences and biology. They've lost touch with reality. Only, frankly, heterosexual biological women have children, and so we should just respect reality, and people might be a bit
heterosexual. No, I've known plenty of women who are gay who've had children, but they can't do it the natural way.
Yes, I know, but human beings
but
are built like
nevertheless women, not
so
non-binary. They're not men.
For the predominant standard rather than these marginal outliers.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And again, it's only ever when it's about women's healthcare that these words are changed, never for the men. Connor Tomlinson, writer at Courage Media, thank you for that. Sam Armstrong, I mean, this stuff just makes us all tear our hair. I know you did loads of work at the Free Speech Union as well. It's when they start controlling the language, but the language has power.
Yeah, it hugely does. And of course, that is why they're going after the likes of William Shakespeare, who so amplifies what it is to be English, what it is to write about England, to feel English, etc. They have to go after these people because, heaven forbid,